Hey guys, Rusty Historian here, and tonight we're diving into something that's going to make your worst Monday morning look like a spa day. We're talking about the terrifying life of a laudanum addict in early modern London. And trust me, this is not your grandmother's period drama. Before you get too comfortable, hit that like button if you enjoy this kind of deep dive into history's darker corners. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's good to know you and to feel that the work we put in is being seen. Now, dim the lights, maybe grab a snack, though you might lose your appetite by the end of this, and let's jump into a world where your medicine cabinet could literally kill you, your doctor was probably drunk, and addiction wasn't just socially acceptable, it was practically mandatory. Picture this. It's 1680-something in London, and you've got a toothache. Seems simple enough, right? Pop an ibuprofen, maybe see a dentist if it gets bad. But here's the thing. Ibuprofen won't be invented for another 280 years, and that dentist down the street is actually a blacksmith who pulls teeth on weekends for extra coin. So what do? You reach for laudanum, that magical little brown bottle that promises to make all your problems disappear. And it does, along with your teeth, your job, your family, and eventually your life. But here's what makes this story absolutely wild. Laudanum wasn't some back alley drug deal. This was medicine, prescribed by doctors, sold in apothecary shops, given to babies for crying, to women for hysteria, and to men for everything from gout to existential dread. You're about to spend the next few hours with me walking through a single day in the life of someone whose relationship with this miracle cure has gone from medical necessity to absolute nightmare. And the scariest part? They don't even know they're addicted yet. The word addiction, as we understand it, won't even exist for another century. So buckle up, because we're going back to an age where your cure was worse than your disease, where withdrawal symptoms were called nervous disorders, and where the line between medicine and poison was thinner than the gruel they served in workhouses. Chapter 2. The Morning Ritual, or How to Start Your Day Wrong. It's 4:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in October 1687. You're lying in a narrow bed in a cramped room above a cobbler's shop in Cheapside, and you're about to experience the most brutal wake-up call in history. Your eyes snap open, but not because of some gentle morning sunlight filtering through lace curtains. Oh no, there are no lace curtains here, just a piece of oiled cloth that barely keeps the wind out. You're awake because every nerve in your body is screaming. Your skin feels like it's crawling with invisible insects. Your stomach is churning like a butter churn operated by a maniac. Cold sweats are pouring off you despite the October chill that's making your breath visible in the air. And the shaking is so violent you can hear your teeth chattering. But here's the thing that would blow our modern minds. You don't think you're sick. You think you're dying of whatever mysterious ailment brought you to laudanum in the first place. Maybe it was that tooth that started aching 6 months ago. Maybe it was the melancholy that's been plaguing you since your third child died of smallpox. Maybe it was just the general horror of existing in 17th century London. You fumble in the dark for that blessed brown bottle on the rickety table beside your bed. Your hands are shaking so badly you can barely grip it. The cork comes out with that familiar little pop that's become the most beautiful sound in your world. 1 spoonful, that's all it takes. Down the hatch, and you wait. 5 minutes. The shaking starts to ease. 10 minutes. Your stomach settles. 15 minutes. That warm golden feeling starts spreading through your chest like honey mixed with starlight. 20 minutes. You're not just feeling human again, you're feeling superhuman. The world has color again. Problems seem manageable. Life is worth living. Congratulations. You've just experienced what we now know as withdrawal, followed by relief. The basic cycle that defines addiction. But you think you've just taken your medicine. The laudanum you've just consumed is basically liquid opium mixed with wine or brandy, with maybe some spices thrown in to mask the bitter taste. We're talking about something that would make modern prescription painkillers look like children's aspirin. And you just drank it like it was cough syrup. But here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely terrifying. The bottle you're holding contains anywhere from 8% to 25% opium, depending on who made it and whether they were feeling generous that day. There's no FDA, no standardized doses, no warning labels. It's basically pharmaceutical roulette. You stand up feeling like you could conquer the world and start getting dressed. But getting dressed in 1687 isn't like throwing on jeans and a t-shirt. Oh no, we're talking about an elaborate performance that would make a Broadway costume change look simple. First, the linen shirt, assuming you own one that isn't falling apart. Then the doublet, if you're a man, or the stays if you're a woman. These stays, by the way, are basically medieval torture devices designed to create the fashionable silhouette of the time. They're made of whalebone and dreams, held together with determination and the prayers of underpaid seamstresses. But here's the thing about laudanum. It makes everything feel amazing. Those stays that usually dig into your ribs, comfortable as clouds, Those shoes that normally give you blisters by noon, like walking on pillows. That itchy woolen coat that makes you want to scratch your skin off. Soft as silk. This is the insidious beauty of opium-based drugs. They don't just kill pain, they make everything better, brighter, easier, more bearable. And in a world where bearable is often the best you can hope for, that's a pretty tempting offer. You make your way downstairs, past the cobbler who's already at work, because apparently 5 a.m. is sleeping in when you're making shoes by candlelight, and out into the streets of London. And what streets they are. Chapter 3. Welcome to Hell's Kitchen, literally. Step outside and the first thing that hits you isn't the cold air, it's the smell. And folks, I cannot stress this enough, London in 1687 smells like every nightmare you've ever had, decided to throw a party in a sewer. Picture the worst public restroom you've ever encountered. Now multiply that by about 10,000, add in some rotting fish, burning coal, unwashed human bodies, horse manure, and the general funk of a city that hasn't figured out waste management yet. And that's your morning air freshener. The streets, and I use the term streets very loosely here, are basically open sewers with delusions of grandeur. The road surface is a charming mixture of cobblestones, mud, animal waste, human waste, garbage, and the occasional dead cat. It's like the world's worst obstacle course, designed by someone who really, really hated pedestrians. But here's where your laudanum becomes your superpower again. Those overwhelming smells that would normally have you gagging, barely noticeable. That disgusting slurry you're walking through that's seeping through the holes in your shoes. Who cares? You're floating on a cloud of medicinal bliss. You pick your way carefully through the muck, dodging the night soil men who are emptying chamber pots from the houses above directly into the street. Yes, you read that right. People are literally throwing their poop out of windows. There's supposed to be a warning cry of "Gardy-loo," but half the time people forget, and half the time they just don't care. This is where I need to paint you a picture of what early modern London actually looked like, because the movies have been lying to you. This isn't some charming period drama with clean cobblestones and people in perfectly pressed costumes. This is urban survival horror. The buildings lean in over the streets like drunk giants trying to touch foreheads. Some of these structures are so old and poorly maintained that they're basically held up by habit and stubbornness. The second and third floors jut out over the street level, creating a permanent twilight at ground level and providing perfect platforms for emptying chamber pots onto unsuspecting pedestrians. The population density is absolutely insane. We're talking about over 500,000 people crammed into an area that was designed for maybe 50,000. It's like trying to fit a modern rock concert into your living room, except the concert never ends and nobody thought to provide toilets. But your laudanum-enhanced brain isn't processing any of this as the horror show it actually is. Instead, you're practically skipping through the apocalypse, humming a little tune, maybe even nodding pleasantly to the beggar with the festering leg wound who's asking for coins. This is one of the most insidious aspects of opium addiction. It doesn't just numb physical pain, it numbs your ability to perceive danger, to feel appropriate disgust, to recognize when your environment is actively trying to kill you. You're walking through a biological warfare zone with a smile on your face. As you make your way toward your destination, let's say you're heading to your job as a clerk in a merchant's house near the Thames, you pass by scenes that would give modern health inspectors heart attacks, street vendors selling meat that might once have been cow, but could just as easily be horse, dog, or something that died of mysterious causes, puddle water being sold as fresh milk, bread that's more sawdust than grain, and all of it crawling with flies, rats, and bacteria that won't be discovered for another 200 years. But you're feeling great. Maybe you even stopped to buy a meat pie from a vendor whose apron looks like it was used to clean up after a battlefield. It tastes amazing. Everything tastes amazing when you're riding the Laudanum Express. Chapter 4. The workplace, where productivity goes to die. You arrive at the merchant house where you work as a clerk, and immediately your improved mood starts attracting attention. Not good attention, suspicious attention. "You're looking remarkably well this morning, Thomas," says Master Whitmore, your employer, eyeing you with the kind of look usually reserved for milk that might have gone off. "Considering you left early yesterday claiming a fever?" Here's the thing about laudanum that our modern understanding of addiction helps us recognize, but they didn't understand then. It makes you feel like you can handle anything, including situations you absolutely cannot handle. So instead of offering a humble apology and quietly getting to work, you flash a brilliant smile and say something like, "Indeed, Master Whitmore, I've discovered a most excellent remedy that has quite restored my constitution. Perhaps you'd care to hear about it?" The other clerks, there are 3 of them, all underfed and overworked, exchange glances. They know something's off. Maybe it's the fact that you're volunteering to take on extra work. Maybe it's the way you're practically bouncing on your toes. Maybe it's the fact that you've been discovering excellent remedies with increasing frequency over the past few months. Your job, in case you're wondering, involves copying documents by hand in a room lit by maybe 4 candles, and whatever gray light manages to filter through windows that haven't been properly cleaned since the Reformation. You're hunched over a desk that was probably made when Henry VIII was still collecting wives, using a quill pen and ink that costs more than you make in a week. Under normal circumstances, this work is mind-numbing drudgery that leaves you with a permanent crick in your neck, ink stains on everything you own, an eye strain that makes you see halos around candle flames. But not today. Today, you're a copying machine fueled by opium and enthusiasm. You attack those documents like they're love letters from your dearest friend. Your handwriting, usually cramped and careful, becomes flowing and elaborate. You're adding decorative flourishes to routine business correspondence. You're humming while you work. You're actually enjoying yourself. This lasts for about 3 hours. That's roughly how long your morning dose of laudanum keeps you in the golden zone, that perfect sweet spot where pain is gone, energy is high, and life feels manageable. But here's the cruel mathematics of opium addiction. Tolerance builds fast, peaks don't last as long, and valleys get deeper. By 10 a.m., you're starting to feel not terrible exactly, but not great. The letters on the page are getting a little blurry. Your hand is starting to cramp. That candle smoke that didn't bother you earlier is now making your eyes water. By 11 a.m., you're sweating despite the cold. Your hands have developed a subtle tremor that's making your usually neat penmanship look like chicken scratches. You keep making mistakes and having to start documents over. By noon, you're in full-blown withdrawal and you have a choice to make. You could tough it out, suffer through the rest of the day feeling like death warmed over. Go home, collapse into bed, and hope tomorrow is better. Or you could visit the apothecary. Guess which option your brain chooses? Chapter 5. The apothecary. Your dealer wears a respectable hat. The apothecary shop is just a 5-minute walk from the merchant house, and you make the journey like a man walking toward salvation, which, in your mind, you absolutely are. The shop itself is a fascinating little microcosm of 17th century medicine, which is to say, it's equal parts miraculous and horrifying. The walls are lined with jars containing substances that range from genuinely helpful herbs to things that would probably be classified as war crimes today. There's willow bark, which actually does help with pain and fever, alongside jars of unicorn horn, rhino horn if you're lucky, horse hooves if you're not, dragon's blood, tree resin thankfully, and my personal favorite, mummy powder, which is exactly what it sounds like. Wealthy Egyptians were literally being ground up and sold as medicine. But you're not here for exotic remedies. You're here for your usual. The apothecary, Master Gideon Fletcher, knows you by name now. This should probably be a red flag, but in your current state, it feels like excellent customer service. The usual remedy, Master Thomas? He asks, already reaching for the brown bottle behind the counter. Indeed, you manage, trying not to let your hands shake as you count out the coins. The tooth has been giving me considerable trouble again. This is your story, and you're sticking to it. The tooth. It's always the tooth. Never mind that said tooth was pulled 3 months ago by a barber surgeon who was definitely drunk at the time. Never mind that the pain you're treating has somehow migrated from your mouth to your entire nervous system. Master Fletcher measures out your dose with the precision of someone who understands exactly how powerful this stuff is. 2 spoonfuls into a small vial. Enough to get you through the afternoon, but not so much that you'll be obviously intoxicated. This is where the business relationship between apothecary and customer gets really interesting. Master Fletcher isn't stupid. He knows perfectly well that your tooth pain story is complete nonsense. He also knows that laudanum is incredibly profitable, and that customers who use it regularly become very loyal customers indeed. But here's the thing that makes this situation both tragic and terrifying. Neither of you thinks you're doing anything wrong. In 1687, the concept of addiction as a medical condition doesn't exist yet. The prevailing medical theory is that if you keep needing a remedy, it's because you keep having the same illness. So when Master Fletcher sees you coming in every day for the same medication, he doesn't think, this man is addicted to opium. He thinks, this man has a very persistent medical condition that requires ongoing treatment. And you? You think exactly the same thing. You pay for your laudanum. And it's not cheap, by the way. We're talking about roughly half a day's wages for a working person. If you were buying this much laudanum today, it would be like spending $50 or $100 every single day on your medicine. The moment that liquid hits your tongue, the relief is so immediate and overwhelming that you actually close your eyes and sigh. Master Fletcher pretends not to notice, but you catch him watching you with an expression that might be concern, might be guilt, or might just be professional interest. The same again tomorrow? He asks, and it's supposed to be a question, but you both know it isn't really. We shall see how the tooth fares, you reply, which is code for, yes, absolutely, same time tomorrow. Maybe earlier, if today gets really bad. Chapter 6. The afternoon slide, when medicine becomes prison. Back at work, you're a new man again. The laudanum has kicked in with that familiar warm embrace, and suddenly copying invoices feels like the most important work in the world. You're contributing to commerce. You're part of the great engine of trade that makes London the economic powerhouse of Europe. This euphoric productivity lasts for about 2 hours. Then reality starts seeping back in like water through a leaky roof. It's subtle at first. The candle flame starts looking a little too bright. Your back begins to ache from hunching over the desk. The scratching of quills on paper, yours and your colleagues', starts to sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. But here's where the mathematics of addiction get really cruel. You're not just coming down from your noon dose, you're also coming down from your morning dose. Your body is essentially in double withdrawal, and it is not happy about it. By 2 p.m., you're making mistakes. Not big mistakes. You're still functional enough to keep your job, but the kind of small errors that add up. A misspelled word here, a smudged line there, numbers that don't quite add up correctly. Master Whitmore notices. He doesn't say anything directly, but he starts checking your work more carefully. He assigns you the less important documents. He starts giving you the kind of look that suggests your employment might not be as secure as you thought. This is where the social aspect of early modern laudanum use gets really interesting and really horrible. See, in 1687, if you're acting strange, people don't think medical problem or addiction. They think moral failing. The dominant philosophical framework of the time is that your behavior reflects your character, and your character reflects your soul. If you're unreliable, lazy, or unpredictable, it's because you're a bad person. The idea that there might be chemical reasons for changes in behavior is still centuries away. So when your colleagues start whispering about your performance, they're not wondering if you need help. They're wondering if you can be trusted. They're questioning your integrity, your work ethic, your fundamental worth as a human being. And you can hear them whispering. The paranoia is another lovely side effect of regular opium use. Your hearing becomes hyperacute. Every whispered conversation feels like it's about you. Every glance feels like judgment. Every laugh must be at your expense. By 3 p.m., you're convinced that Master Whitmore is planning to dismiss you. By 3:30, you're sure your colleagues are plotting against you. By 4 p.m., you're certain that everyone in London knows your secret shame. Except, of course, you don't think of it as a secret shame. You think of it as a medical condition that you're treating responsibly with proper medicine purchased from a licensed apothecary. The cognitive dissonance would be fascinating if it weren't so tragic. Chapter 7, The Evening Ritual, Dinner and Denial. Your workday ends at 5 p.m., which in October means you're walking home in near complete darkness. The streets, which were horrifying enough in daylight, have now transformed into something out of a fever dream. London, after dark in 1687, is not a place for the faint of heart. There's no street lighting except for the occasional lantern hung outside a tavern or shop. The moon and stars, when visible through the smoke and clouds, provide about as much illumination as a birthday candle in a football stadium. But this is where your laudanum dependency provides an unexpected benefit. Liquid courage. You're walking through these dangerous streets with the confidence of someone who feels no fear and little pain. Whether this is actually a benefit or just a way to die with a smile on your face is open for debate. The sounds of evening London are like a symphony composed by someone who hated music. Dogs barking at shadows, drunks singing off-key ballads, the splash of chamber pots being emptied, the creak of hanging shop signs moving in the wind, and underneath it all, the constant scurrying of rats. So many rats that the sound becomes almost like white noise. You navigate by memory and instinct, stepping carefully around piles of refuse and trying not to think too hard about what's squelching under your shoes. The laudanum helps with this too. It dampens not just physical sensation, but emotional reaction. That thing that might be a dead cat, just another obstacle to step around. That drunk man urinating against a wall, none of your concern. Home is the room above the cobbler's shop, where your landlord, Master Cobbler, yes, that's actually what you call him, charges you rent that takes up about 60% of your income. The room comes furnished, which means there's a bed, a table, a chair, and a chamber pot. Luxury accommodations, these are not. But tonight, like most nights now, you're not going straight home. Tonight, you're going to the tavern. The Blue Boar is the kind of establishment that exists in the gray area between respectable working-class gathering place and den of iniquity where things happen that we don't talk about in polite company. It's dark, it's loud, it's smoky, and it's exactly where someone in your condition wants to be. The moment you walk in, you're hit with a wall of sensory overload. The air is thick with tobacco smoke, cooking smells, and the collective body odor of about 50 people who consider bathing a seasonal activity. There's a fire in the hearth that's producing more smoke than warmth, and the whole place is lit by candles that cast dancing shadows on walls stained with decades of soot and spilled ale. And it's perfect, because everyone here is escaping from something. Chapter 8, The Tavern Society, Finding Your Tribe. The wonderful thing about taverns in early modern London is that they're remarkably democratic institutions. Merchant and laborer, craftsman and clerk, all rubbing shoulders in the pursuit of alcohol-induced oblivion. Social hierarchies still exist, of course, but they're softened by the universal human desire to forget about your problems for a few hours. You find your usual spot at a long wooden table that's been carved with more initials than a high school desk. The surface is sticky with spilled ale and marked with countless ring stains from mugs and bottles. It's not clean by any standard, but it's familiar, and right now familiar feels like luxury. The serving girl, let's call her Mary because half the serving girls in London seem to be named Mary, brings you your usual without being asked. A pint of ale that's roughly the consistency and color of muddy water, with a taste that suggests the brewer learned their trade from someone who had once heard about beer from a distance. But here's the thing about ale in 1687. It's safer than water. No, really. The brewing process kills most of the bacteria that would otherwise give you dysentery, cholera, or one of the dozen other waterborne diseases that regularly wipe out entire neighborhoods. So drinking ale isn't just social lubrication, it's a survival strategy. You settle in with your drink and look around at your fellow patrons. There's old Jack, the former soldier who lost his leg at some battle he can't quite remember anymore, thanks to the impressive amount of gin he consumes daily. There's Martha the seamstress, whose hands shake so badly from whatever she takes for her nerves that she can barely hold her drink. There's young Tom, the apprentice, who spends his wages on laudanum for his stomach complaints. This is your community now, not the respectable folk at your workplace who whisper about your declining performance, not the neighbors in your boarding house who avoid eye contact when you pass in the hallway. These people, the ones who understand that sometimes you need a little something to make life bearable. The conversation flows like molasses mixed with broken glass. Everyone has stories. Everyone has complaints. Everyone has solutions that involve various combinations of alcohol and opiates. My back's been acting up something fierce, says Martha, showing off a new bottle of what she claims is medicine for joint pain. It's clearly laudanum, with maybe some herbs thrown in for marketing purposes. The tooth's been giving me trouble again, you contribute, tapping your jaw in a gesture that's become second nature. Nobody questions this. Nobody points out that you've been treating the same tooth for 6 months. In this crowd, everyone's got their ongoing medical issue that requires ongoing medication. The evening passes in a haze of ale, smoke, and pharmaceutical camaraderie. Someone starts singing a ballad about true love lost. Someone else tells a joke about a priest, a miller, and a goat that doesn't make much sense but gets laughs anyway. The candles burn lower, the fire dies down to embers, and gradually people start making their way home. But not you. Not yet. Because the evening dose is wearing off, and home is just a cold room with a hard bed and no distractions from the growing unease in your chest. Chapter 9. The Night Terrors, when the medicine stops working. It's nearly midnight when you finally stumble home and the laudanum is completely out of your system now. The ale helped for a while. Alcohol and opiates make excellent partners in crime. But now you're dealing with the combined hangover effect of both substances leaving your body simultaneously. The climb up the narrow stairs to your room feels like scaling a mountain. Each step requires concentrated effort, and you have to pause twice to catch your breath and wait for the dizziness to pass. The walls seem to be moving slightly, breathing in and out like some vast lung. Your room, when you finally reach it, is absolutely freezing. October in London is not kind to people living in poorly insulated buildings, and your single window does little to keep out the wind. Your breath forms visible clouds, and you can hear the shutters rattling like teeth chattering. You light a single candle, you can't afford to waste them, and the flickering light makes the shadows dance in ways that your withdrawing brain interprets as threatening. Every corner could be hiding something. Every sound from the street below could be danger approaching. Getting undressed is an ordeal. Your hands are shaking so badly that simple tasks, like untying your shoes, become complex puzzles. Your shirt is soaked with sweat despite the cold, and when you will finally get it off, you can smell the sour, sickly odor that's become your constant companion. You collapse onto the bed, pulling the thin blanket up to your chin and try to sleep. But sleep and opiate withdrawal are not friends. Instead, you lie there in the dark, experiencing a parade of symptoms that would make a modern doctor immediately recognize addiction, but which you interpret as mysterious illness. The restless legs start first, that terrible feeling like insects crawling under your skin, making it impossible to find a comfortable position. You twist and turn, kicking at the blankets, trying to find some relief that doesn't exist. Then comes the nausea. Your stomach churns with the rhythm of a ship in a storm, and you have to keep the chamber pot within arm's reach, because you never know when you might need it urgently. The sweating and chills take turns tormenting you. One moment you're throwing off the blanket because you're burning up, the next you're pulling it tight because you're shivering uncontrollably. Your body can't regulate its temperature without the chemical assistance it's become dependent on. But the worst part is the anxiety. Your heart races like you've been running, but you're lying perfectly still. Every small sound, the wind, a rat in the walls, footsteps in the street, sends a jolt of panic through your system. You're absolutely convinced that something terrible is about to happen, but you can't identify what or when or how to prevent it. This is where the real horror of early modern addiction becomes clear. You don't understand what's happening to you. You don't know that these symptoms are caused by withdrawal. You don't know that there's a predictable cycle at work here. All you know is that you feel terrible, and you know what makes you feel better. Chapter 10, the 3 a.m. decision, rock bottom. As a basement, at 3:17 a.m., you make a decision that will change everything. You're lying in bed, sweating through sheets that are already damp, when the shaking gets so bad that you accidentally knock your water cup off the bedside table. The crash in the dark silence sounds like a gunshot, and you're sure you've woken up half the building. But more importantly, you're sure you're dying. This isn't the usual discomfort you've been experiencing. This feels different, worse, more urgent. Your heart is pounding so hard you can see your shirt moving with each beat. Your breathing is shallow and rapid. The room seems to be spinning slowly, like you're on some horrible carnival ride designed by someone who hates fun. In your laudanum-deprived state, logic isn't working properly. You can't remember if you took your evening dose or not. Maybe you forgot. Maybe that's why you feel so terrible. Maybe you need to correct the oversight. You fumble in the dark for your emergency supply, the little vial you keep hidden behind the loose board in the wall. Every serious laudanum user has an emergency supply. It's like a security blanket, except this security blanket could kill you. Your hands are shaking so violently that you can barely get the cork out. When you finally manage it, you don't bother measuring. You don't bother with a spoon. You just tip the bottle to your lips and drink. It's supposed to be a small sip, just enough to take the edge off so you can sleep. But your hands are shaking and you're desperate, and desperation makes people stupid. You drink about 3 times as much as you intended. The effect is immediate and overwhelming. The relief washes over you like warm honey, but it keeps coming, and coming, and coming. That familiar golden feeling becomes a golden flood, and suddenly you realize you might have made a very serious mistake. Your pupils contract to pinpricks. Your breathing, which was rapid and shallow, becomes slow and deep. Your heart rate, which was racing, slows to a crawl. The room stops spinning, but now it's starting to fade around the edges. This is what a laudanum overdose feels like from the inside. It's not like the dramatic poisoning scenes in movies. There's no dramatic clutching at the throat, no violent convulsions. It's more like a dissolving, like becoming less solid, less present, less real. You try to stand up, thinking maybe you should get help, but your legs won't support you. You try to call out, but your voice comes out as barely a whisper. You try to think clearly, but your thoughts are moving like honey in winter. The scary part isn't the physical symptoms. The scary part is that it feels good. Even as part of your brain is screaming that something is wrong, another part is reveling in the absolute peace, the complete absence of pain, the warm cocoon of chemical bliss. This is how people die from opiate overdoses. Not in agony, but in euphoria. Not fighting for life, but letting it slip away like water through their fingers. You manage to stay conscious, but just barely. The next few hours pass in a haze of half sleep, half hallucination, and complete vulnerability. If anyone had decided to rob your room, murder you in your bed, or set the building on fire, you would have been helpless to respond. But you don't die. You wake up the next morning feeling like you've been hit by a cart, but alive. And that's when you realize something that chills you to the bone. You're not sure if you're disappointed or relieved. Chapter 11, the morning after, when rock bottom has a sub-basement. Dawn breaks gray and miserable over London, filtering through your oiled cloth window like dirty water through a sieve. You wake up, if you can call the process of becoming conscious after last night waking up, feeling like your body has been disassembled, stomped on by horses, and reassembled by someone who was only vaguely familiar with human anatomy. Your mouth tastes like something died in it and was left to rot for a week. Your head feels like it's been stuffed with wet wool and then used as a drum by an enthusiastic but tone-deaf musician. Every joint in your body aches with a deep, bone-grinding pain that makes you understand why medieval people thought illness was caused by demons. But here's the truly terrifying part. You're not thinking about how you almost died last night. You're thinking about how good you felt right before you lost consciousness. Your brain, in its infinite wisdom, has filed last night's experience under successful treatment of symptoms rather than near-death experience caused by stupidity. The overdose wasn't a warning. It was a glimpse of what perfect pain management could feel like. You sit up slowly, waiting for the room to stop tilting at alarming angles, and immediately reach for your laudanum bottle. Not the emergency stash, that's empty now, but your regular daily supply. Your hands are steadier this morning. The violent shaking from withdrawal has been replaced by a more subtle tremor, the kind you might get from too much coffee. If coffee could kill you, which in 1687 it very well might, considering the state of London's water supply. 1 spoonful, that's the plan. Just enough to function. But as you're measuring it out, you notice something that makes your blood run cold. The bottle, which should have enough laudanum to last you 3 more days, is nearly empty. You stare at it for a long moment, trying to reconcile the mathematics. You bought a full bottle yesterday. You took your morning dose. You You took your afternoon dose, you took your evening dose, and then, the emergency stash wasn't the only laudanum you consumed last night. In your withdrawal-addled state, you apparently also drank most of your regular supply. This means two things. First, you're lucky to be alive. Second, you're going to be visiting Master Fletcher much sooner than planned. You dress with the careful precision of someone who knows they're not entirely in control of their motor functions. Each button requires conscious thought. Each step across the room needs to be planned in advance. You're like a marionette being operated by someone who's had a few too many drinks themselves. The walk to work is a nightmare of sensory overload and social paranoia. Every sound seems amplified. The clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones sounds like thunder. The morning calls of street vendors feel like personal attacks on your eardrums. The usual horrific smells of London streets are somehow both overwhelming and strangely muted, as if your brain can't decide whether to shut down your senses entirely or turn them up to 11. But worse than the physical discomfort is the growing awareness that people are looking at you differently. The baker you pass every morning doesn't nod his usual greeting. The woman sweeping her front step actually steps back as you approach. A group of children playing in the street stops their game to stare at you with the kind of frank curiosity usually reserved for two-headed calves at country fairs. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a shop window and understand why. Your face is pale and waxy, with dark circles under your eyes that make you look like you've been punched by an expert. Your clothes, which you thought you put on properly, are wrinkled and slightly askew. Your hair is sticking up at odd angles, and there's a general air about you that suggests a person who should not be trusted with sharp objects or small children. This is the moment when the social consequences of your laudanum use start to become visible. In a society where your reputation is literally a matter of life and death, where being known as unreliable can mean losing your job, your housing, and your place in the community, looking like a person who can't manage their own basic hygiene is a serious problem. Chapter 12. The Workplace Reckoning, when your boss stops pretending. You arrive at the merchant house exactly on time, which, in your current state, feels like a monumental achievement. Master Whitmore is waiting for you at the front desk, and the expression on his face suggests that this conversation has been planned. "Thomas," he says, and his tone has that carefully neutral quality that people use when they're about to deliver bad news. "A word, if you please." He leads you to his private office, a cramped room that smells of old paper and disappointment. The walls are lined with ledgers dating back decades, a paper monument to the grinding daily business of commerce. He closes the door behind you, which is never a good sign. "Your work yesterday," he begins, pulling out a stack of documents you copied, "requires some discussion." He spreads the papers across his desk like evidence in a trial, which is essentially what this is. Your handwriting, which was so beautiful and flowing in the morning when you were riding the laudanum high, deteriorated throughout the day into something that looks like a spider fell into an inkwell and then had a seizure across the page. But it's not just the handwriting. The content is wrong. Numbers don't add up. Names are misspelled. Dates are incorrect. What should have been routine copying has become a catalog of errors that would make a first-day apprentice look competent. Furthermore, Master Whitmore continues, there have been irregularities in your attendance and behavior that have not gone unnoticed. Irregularities. That's a polite way of saying everyone knows something is wrong with you, but we're too polite to say it directly. You want to defend yourself. You want to explain about the tooth, about the medicine, about how you're treating a legitimate medical condition with proper remedies purchased from a licensed apothecary. But the words won't come together properly. Your tongue feels thick and clumsy, and your thoughts are moving like molasses in January. You begin, then stop. "The tooth has been..." "Thomas?" Master Whitmore interrupts, not unkindly. "I've known you for 3 years. You've been a reliable clerk, careful with details, prompt in your duties. But these past months..." He gestures at the ruined documents. "This is not the work of someone suffering from dental pain. This is where the conversation takes a turn that will haunt you for years to come. Because Master Whitmore isn't just your employer. He's a deacon at the local church, a respected member of the community, and someone whose opinion carries weight in the small world of London clerks and merchants. I'm going to ask you directly," he says, leaning forward across his desk. "Are you drinking to excess?" The question hits you like a physical blow. Drinking to excess. The accusation that respectable people fear most, because it's not just about alcohol, it's about moral failing, about weakness of character, about the kind of personal dissolution that decent society cannot tolerate. "No, sir," you protest. "I take ale with my meals, as any man does, but I am not..." "Then what?" he asks. "Because something is clearly amiss. And if it's not drink, then what explanation can you offer?" This is your moment. You could tell him about the laudanum. You could explain about the medical treatment, about the tooth pain, about the physician's recommendations. You could throw yourself on his mercy and ask for understanding. But something stops you. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's shame. Maybe it's the growing awareness that your medical treatment has become something else entirely. "I have been unwell. you say finally. But I am taking measures to address the condition. It's not exactly a lie, but it's not exactly the truth either. It's the kind of careful non-answer that people give when they know they're in trouble but don't know how to get out of it. Master Whitmore studies your face for a long moment, and you can see him making calculations. You're a decent clerk when you're functional. Training a replacement would be expensive and time-consuming, but keeping you on while you deteriorate further could damage his business's reputation. Very well, he says, finally. But Thomas, I must be clear about this. Your position here depends on immediate and sustained improvement in your work. No more errors, no more irregularities, no more excuses about teeth or any other ailments. Can you commit to that? You nod eagerly, relief flooding through you. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. You won't have cause for complaint. But even as you're saying the words, part of your brain is already calculating how much laudanum you'll need to get through the day without making mistakes. And you're beginning to realize that the amount might be more than you can afford. Chapter 13, The Mathematics of Desperation. When money becomes a problem. The rest of the workday passes in a haze of careful concentration and growing panic. Every document you copy gets checked and double-checked. Every letter gets traced with the meticulous care of someone who knows their job depends on perfection. You're working at about half your normal speed, but the results are acceptable, barely. By afternoon, the morning dose of laudanum is wearing off, and you're faced with a choice that's becoming increasingly familiar. Suffer through the discomfort and risk making mistakes, or take another dose and risk running out of supply before you can afford more. The mathematics are brutal. A bottle of laudanum costs approximately 8 shillings. Your weekly wage is 15 shillings. After paying for your room, 6 shillings. Food, 4 shillings. And other necessities, 2 shillings. You have exactly 3 shillings left over each week. But you're no longer buying 1 bottle per week. You're buying 1 bottle every 4 days, sometimes every 3 days. And after last night's emergency, you're looking at needing a new bottle tomorrow instead of Thursday. This means you need to find an extra 5 shillings somewhere in your budget. 5 shillings that don't exist. You could eat less, gruel instead of bread, water instead of ale, skip meals entirely when possible. But you're already thin enough that your clothes hang loose and any less food might make you too weak to work. You could find cheaper lodgings, but cheaper in London usually means more dangerous, less secure, or shared with so many other people that privacy becomes impossible. And privacy is becoming increasingly important as your condition becomes more obvious. You could sell something, but what? Your few possessions consist of the clothes on your back, a spare shirt with holes in it, 2 books, both religious texts inherited from your father, and a small silver ring that belonged to your mother. The ring. You've been trying not to think about the ring. It's worth maybe 10 shillings if you could find the right buyer. Enough for a bottle of laudanum and some food. Enough to solve your immediate problem. But it's also the last connection you have to your family, to your life before London, to the person you used to be. Selling it would feel like selling a piece of your soul, which, let's be honest, is exactly what you're contemplating. By the time work ends, you've made your decision. Not about the ring, it's still too horrible to contemplate seriously, but about your immediate needs. You're going to the apothecary to buy laudanum you can't afford, and you'll figure out how to pay for it later. This is the point where financial desperation starts driving addiction deeper underground. When you can't afford your medicine through legitimate means, you start finding illegitimate ones. Chapter 14. The Apothecary's Dilemma, when your dealer has a conscience. Master Fletcher is measuring out someone else's prescription when you arrive at the apothecary shop. You wait near the door, trying to look casual while fighting the urge to pace nervously. The other customer, an elderly woman buying something for her women's troubles, takes forever completing her transaction, counting out coins with the careful deliberation of someone who doesn't have many to spare. Finally, she leaves, and you approach the counter with what you hope looks like confidence, but probably looks more like desperation. The usual, Master Fletcher, you say, placing 6 shillings on the counter. It's not enough, and you both know it. Master Fletcher looks at the coins, then at you, then back at the coins. His expression is carefully neutral, but you can see the wheels turning behind his eyes. I'm afraid the price has increased, he says slowly. New suppliers, you understand. More costly to procure the necessary ingredients. This is a lie, and you both know it. But it's a polite lie, a face-saving lie that allows you both to acknowledge the real situation without stating it directly. I see, you reply. Perhaps a smaller quantity? Just to tide me over until I can arrange for the full amount? This is where Master Fletcher faces his own moral dilemma. He's a businessman, but he's also something approaching a medical professional. He can see what laudanum is doing to you. The weight loss, the tremor in your hands, the increasingly desperate look in your eyes. He knows that what you're asking for isn't treatment anymore, it's feeding an addiction. But the concept of addiction as a treatable medical condition doesn't exist yet. In his understanding of the world, you have a chronic condition that requires ongoing medication. and cutting off that medication would be cruel and potentially dangerous. Perhaps, he says carefully, an arrangement might be made. A smaller quantity now, with the understanding that the full balance would be settled within the week. Relief floods through you so powerfully that you actually sway on your feet. Yes, you say quickly. Absolutely, by Friday, without fail. Master Fletcher measures out half your usual quantity, enough for 2 doses instead of 4. It's not enough to last you until Friday, but it's enough to get you through tomorrow. You'll worry about the day after tomorrow when it arrives. As he hands you the vial, Master Fletcher does something he's never done before. He looks you directly in the eyes and speaks quietly, almost confidentially. Thomas, he says, have you considered reducing the frequency of your doses? Perhaps taking the medicine only when the pain is at its worst? It's the closest thing to medical advice about addiction that you're likely to get in 1687. He's trying to help in the only way he knows how, but your brain interprets the suggestion as a threat. Reduce the frequency when the pain, by which you mean the withdrawal symptoms, though you don't know that's what they are, is already becoming unbearable. The tooth gives me considerable trouble, you reply stiffly. I shall take your suggestion under advisement. Master Fletcher nods, but his expression suggests he knows exactly how seriously you'll consider his advice. As you leave the shop, you're already calculating 2 doses. If you take 1 now and 1 tomorrow morning, you'll have nothing left for tomorrow afternoon or evening. If you try to stretch them out, you'll be in withdrawal for most of the next 2 days. Neither option seems survivable. Chapter 15. The Evening Descent, when friends become enablers. The Blue Boar Tavern has never looked more welcoming than it does tonight. The warm light spilling from its windows, the sounds of laughter and conversation, the promise of ale and fellowship. It's exactly what you need to distract yourself from the growing knot of anxiety in your chest. You settle into your usual spot and order your usual ale, but tonight you're studying your fellow patrons with new eyes. These people, your drinking companions, your evening entertainment, might be the solution to your problem. Old Jack, the former soldier, always seems to have money despite having no visible source of income. Martha, the seamstress, manages to afford her nerve medicine even though her hands shake too badly for fine needlework. Young Tom, the apprentice, never seems to run short of his stomach remedies. How do they manage it? The answer comes to you as you watch them interact. They're not just drinking companions, they're a network. They share information, resources, and probably more than just conversation. You start listening more carefully to their conversations, picking up on the subtle codes and references that you'd missed before. When Martha mentions that her usual supplier is temporarily out of stock, she's not talking about thread and needles. When Old Jack refers to his army pension arriving early, he's not talking about official military payments. Young Tom provides the opening you need when he starts complaining about his latest batch of stomach medicine. Terrible quality, he says, making a face. Barely effective at all. I don't suppose anyone knows of a better source? This is your moment. I've had excellent results with Master Fletcher's preparation, you offer casually, though I find myself temporarily short of funds for a full bottle. The words hang in the air for a moment, and you wonder if you've miscalculated. But then Martha leans forward with interest. Fletcher's is good, she agrees. Expensive, though. Perhaps a sharing arrangement could be beneficial to all parties. And just like that, you're inducted into the informal network of London's functioning addicts. The conversation that follows is conducted in careful euphemisms and subtle negotiations, but the basic arrangement is simple. Pooled resources, shared supplies, and mutual assistance in times of shortage. Old Jack, it turns out, has a contact who can provide laudanum at reduced prices. No questions asked about the source or quality. Martha has developed a system for stretching supplies by mixing them with wine and honey. Young Tom has identified the times of day when various apothecaries are most likely to extend credit. By the end of the evening, you've arranged to purchase a quarter bottle from Old Jack's supplier, borrowed enough money from Martha to supplement your Friday payment to Master Fletcher, and agreed to help young Tom copy some documents in exchange for a share of his next supply. You stumble home feeling like you've solved all your problems. You have enough laudanum to get through the next few days, a plan for obtaining more, and a support network of people who understand your situation. What you don't realize is that you've just taken the first step into a much darker world. Chapter 16. The Underground Economy. When medicine becomes crime. Old Jack's supplier operates out of a cellar beneath a bakery in Southwark, across the Thames in what polite society considers the disreputable part of London. Getting there requires a boat ride across the river, which at low tide reveals mudflats that smell like concentrated death and despair. You make the journey the next evening, following Old Jack's carefully memorized directions through a maze of narrow alleys and unmarked doors. The bakery itself looks respectable enough. Freshly baked bread in the windows, flour dust on the sills, the warm glow of ovens visible through the back. But the entrance to the cellar is through a side alley, down a set of stone steps that are slick with moisture and things you don't want to identify. Old Jack gives a specific knock. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, and waits. The door opens to reveal a thin man with nervous eyes and stained fingers. He looks you up and down with the calculating gaze of someone who's very good at assessing risk. Jack's friend, old Jack says, by way of introduction. In need of medicine. The thin man, he never gives his name, nods and gestures you inside. The cellar is a revelation and a horror show rolled into one. The space is larger than you expected, with alcoves carved into the stone walls that serve as storage and workspaces. The air is thick with competing odors. The yeasty smell of bread from above, the bitter tang of opium, the sharp chemical scent of whatever solvents are used in the preparation process. This isn't just a place where laudanum is sold, it's where it's made. The thin man leads you to a table covered with bottles, vials, and measuring instruments. The laudanum here comes in various strengths and preparations, from the standard wine-based mixture to concentrated versions that could kill a horse. Prices vary accordingly. First time, the thin man asks, and when you nod, he pulls out a bottle of what looks like standard apothecary laudanum. This is what you're used to. Good quality, proper strength, half the price of Fletcher's. You examine the bottle carefully. It looks legitimate. A proper cork, wax seal, even a label that mimics the style used by licensed apothecaries. But there's something about it that doesn't quite feel right. What's the difference, you ask? The thin man shrugs. Same medicine, less overhead, no shop rent, no guild fees, no taxes to the crown, just good honest trade between people who need medicine and people who can provide it. It's a compelling argument, especially when your alternative is going without. You count out the coins, less than half what Master Fletcher charges, and take possession of your first bottle of illegal laudanum. The trip back across the Thames is nerve-wracking. You're now in possession of contraband, and while the authorities rarely crack down on individual users, being caught with unmarked bottles could lead to questions you don't want to answer. But you make it back to your room without incident, and when you test the contents, they seem to work exactly as expected. Same relief, same warm glow, same blessed absence of withdrawal symptoms. What you don't know is that underground laudanum is a gamble every time. Sometimes it's exactly what it's supposed to be. Sometimes it's watered down with useless additives. Sometimes it's made with wood alcohol instead of wine, which can cause blindness. Sometimes it's much stronger than advertised, which can cause accidental overdoses. You've just entered a world where your medicine comes with no guarantees, except that it's cheaper than the legal alternative. Chapter 17, The Tolerance Trap, when more becomes never enough. 3 weeks into your new supply arrangement, you notice something troubling. The medicine isn't working as well as it used to. It starts subtly. Your morning dose, which used to carry you through until afternoon, now barely lasts until noon. Your afternoon dose, which used to provide that wonderful golden glow of productivity, now just brings you back to baseline normal. Your evening dose, which used to guarantee a good night's sleep, now leaves you tossing and turning for hours. The logical response, your brain tells you, is to increase the dose. Not by much, just a little extra to account for the apparently declining quality of the medicine. You start taking an extra spoonful with each dose, then an extra 2 spoonfuls. Then you're taking double your original amount and still not feeling the effects you remember. This is tolerance, one of the cruelest aspects of opiate addiction. Your body becomes accustomed to the presence of the drug and compensates by reducing its natural production of pain-relieving chemicals. What used to provide relief now just prevents withdrawal, and achieving actual pain relief requires increasingly larger doses. But in 1687, nobody understands tolerance. The prevailing medical theory is that if you need more medicine, it's because your condition is getting worse. So when you find yourself needing larger doses, you interpret this as evidence that your tooth problem is spreading, getting more serious, possibly becoming life-threatening. This interpretation justifies not just the increased doses, but seeking out stronger preparations. The thin man in the Southwark cellar is happy to accommodate your needs. He has bottles marked for severe pain that contain twice the opium concentration of standard laudanum. He has imported preparations from the East Indies that are supposedly more potent than anything made in England. He has his own special recipe that includes additives designed to enhance the effects. For a serious medical condition, he says solemnly, serious medicine is required. You purchase the strongest preparation he has available, convinced that this will solve your problem. And for a few days, it does. That wonderful feeling returns, the golden glow, the sense that all is right with the world, the confidence that you can handle anything life throws at you. But tolerance is a moving target. Within a week, you need more of the stronger preparation. Within 2 weeks, you're taking amounts that would have killed you when you first started, and the cost is becoming astronomical. The stronger preparations cost 3 times as much as standard laudanum. You're now spending more on medicine than you make in wages, and the gap is growing every day. This is when the real desperation begins, when addiction stops being a manageable condition and becomes an all-consuming obsession. Chapter 18, The Moral Compromise, when good people do bad things. The opportunity presents itself on a Thursday afternoon in November. Master Whitmore has left the office to meet with a client, leaving you alone with the ledgers, the cash box, and more temptation than any human being should be expected to resist. You're supposed to be copying invoices, but your hands are shaking so badly that the ink keeps splattering across the page. Your last dose was this morning, and it's wearing off faster than ever. The withdrawal symptoms are starting earlier and hitting harder. You try to concentrate on your work, but the numbers keep swimming on the page. Your vision is blurry, your stomach is churning, and there's a cold sweat breaking out across your forehead. The cash box sits on Master Whitmore's desk, not locked, not hidden, just sitting there like it's daring you to open it. You know exactly how much money is inside. You helped count it yesterday. 12 pounds, 16 shillings, and 4pence. Enough to buy laudanum for months. Enough to solve all your immediate problems. You also know exactly how wrong it would be to take it. Master Whitmore has been more patient with you than you deserve. He's given you chances, made allowances, overlooked mistakes that should have cost you your job. Stealing from him would be a betrayal of everything decent in your life. But your body doesn't care about decency. Your body only cares about the fact that you're in pain and you know how to make it stop. You find yourself standing in front of the cash box without remembering how you got there. Your hands are reaching for the lid without conscious direction from your brain. This is what addiction does. It bypasses rational thought and goes straight to action. The money feels strange in your hands, heavier than it should somehow, like it's made of gilt instead of silver and copper. You don't take it all. That would be too obvious, too risky. You take just enough, 2 pounds, 10 shillings, enough to buy a week's worth of strong laudanum and maybe some food. You tell yourself this is a loan. You'll pay it back as soon as you can afford it. Master Whitmore will never even notice it's missing. And by the time he might, you'll have replaced it. These are the lies that addicts tell themselves to make the unthinkable become acceptable. You close the cash box, return to your desk, and try to continue working as if nothing has happened. But everything has changed. You've crossed a line that you can never uncross. You're no longer just someone with a medical condition who uses medicine. You're a thief. The word sits in your mind like a stone in your shoe, uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. But the relief when you take your evening dose is so overwhelming that the guilt almost disappears. Almost. Chapter 19. The Downward Spiral. When one compromise leads to another. The 2 pounds, 10 shillings lasts exactly 6 days. You'd plan to make it last a week, maybe 2 if you were careful with your doses. But tolerance doesn't respect planning, and withdrawal doesn't care about your budget. By the following Wednesday, you're back where you started. Broke, desperate, and staring at the cash box while withdrawal symptoms make your entire body feel like it's been set on fire. The second theft is easier than the first. Your conscience, which screamed in protest the first time, only whispers weakly now. The guilt is still there, but it's muffled by the overwhelming need for relief. 3 pounds this time. You're getting bolder, or maybe just more desperate. Master Whitmore notices the missing money on Friday. "Thomas," he says, calling you into his office with that same carefully neutral tone that preceded your last serious conversation. "There seems to be a discrepancy in the accounts." Your heart pounds so hard you're sure he can hear it. Your hands shake so violently you have to clasp them behind your back to hide the tremor. "A discrepancy, sir? Money is missing from the cash box, approximately 5 pounds over the past week." His eyes search your face for tells, for signs of guilt, for anything that might confirm his suspicions. You arrange your features into what you hope looks like confused concern. That's a significant sum. Could there be an error in the counting? Possible, Master Whitmore says slowly. "Though I've counted 3 times. I've also spoken with the other clerks. None of them have had access to the box. The implication hangs in the air between you. You're the only one with access. You're the only one who could have taken the money. Perhaps, you suggest, your voice sounding strange and distant in your own ears. Someone broke in. The lock on the front door is quite old." Master Whitmore considers this possibility with the attention of someone who very much wants to believe it. "You've worked for him for 3 years. You've been reliable, honest, trustworthy. The idea that you might be a thief is painful for him to contemplate." "Perhaps," he agrees finally. "I'll have the locks changed. And Thomas? I'll be keeping the cash box in the strong room from now on. For security." You nod eagerly. "Of course, sir. Very wise." But even as you're agreeing, your brain is already calculating. The strong room has a better lock, but Master Whitmore keeps the key on his person during the day and in his desk drawer at night. The desk drawer has a simple lock that could probably be picked with the right tools. This is what addiction does to your moral reasoning. Even as you're promising to be more careful, more trustworthy, you're already planning your next theft. Chapter 20. The Social Unraveling, when everyone starts to notice. By December, your condition has become impossible to hide. The weight loss is dramatic. Your clothes hang loose on your frame like fabric draped over a scarecrow. Your skin has taken on a waxy, yellowish pallor that makes you look like you're slowly dying, which, in a sense, you are. Your hands shake constantly now, not just during withdrawal. Your pupils are either pinpricks or dilated to black circles, depending on when you last dosed. Your speech patterns have changed, sometimes rapid and pressured when you're high, sometimes slow and slurred when you're coming down. The other clerks have stopped inviting you to join them for meals. The serving girl at the Blue Boar eyes you warily when you order drinks. Even the beggars on the street seem to give you a wide berth. But it's the conversation you overhear between two housewives at the market that really drives home how far you've fallen. "See that fellow there?" one says, nodding in your direction. "Lives above the cobbler's shop. Been getting stranger and stranger these past months." "Drink?" asks the other. "Something worse, I'd wager. Look at him, thin as a rail, shaking like a leaf. And the smell—" You hadn't realized there was a smell. But when you get home and examine yourself in the small mirror above your wash basin, you understand what she meant. There's a sour, sickly odor clinging to you, the scent of chemical withdrawal, unwashed clothes, and physical deterioration. Your reflection is a shock. The person staring back at you looks like a stranger. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, skin that seems too tight across sharp cheekbones. This is what addiction looks like from the outside. Not the glamorous, tragic figure of romantic literature, but a walking medical emergency. The landlord, Master Cobbler, stops you on the stairs the next day. "Thomas," he says, blocking your path to your room, "we need to discuss your situation." Your heart sinks. You know what this conversation is about, and it's not going to end well. "There have been complaints," he continues, "about noises at night, about visitors at odd hours, about the general state of things." The visitors he's referring to are your new associates from the Southwark operation. They've started coming to your room for transactions, turning your living space into a satellite location for their business. You need the money from facilitating these deals to pay for your own supply. "I run a respectable establishment," Master Cobbler says firmly. "Whatever arrangements you've made, whatever business you're conducting, it needs to stop. Immediately." "I'm not conducting any business," you protest. "These are friends, visiting for social purposes. Friends who come and go at all hours, who pay you money before they leave, who skulk around like they're avoiding the watch." Master Cobbler shakes his head. "I'm not a fool, Thomas." He gives you 1 week to resolve your situation, code for either stop the drug dealing or find somewhere else to live. 1 week. 7 days to find new housing in a city where landlords are increasingly reluctant to rent to someone who looks like you do. Chapter 21. The Final Descent. When the bottom falls out. The end comes on a Tuesday in January, during the coldest winter London has seen in years. You're at work, trying to copy a contract despite hands that are shaking so badly you can barely hold the quill when Master Whitmore walks in with 2 men you don't recognize. They're well-dressed, official-looking, and they're not here for routine business. "Thomas," Master Whitmore says, and his voice is heavy with sadness and resignation. "Well, these gentlemen are from the magistrate's office. They'd like to speak with you." Your blood turns to ice water. The theft of the strong-room key last week wasn't as clean as you thought. Or maybe someone saw you meeting with the Southwark dealers. Or maybe one of your customers was caught and gave up your name to avoid prosecution. The magistrate's men are polite but firm. They have questions about missing money, about your financial situation, about certain individuals you've been seen associating with. They search your room and find things that are difficult to explain. Multiple bottles of unmarked medicine, more money than you should reasonably possess, and letters arranging meetings in Southwark. Master Whitmore is present during the search, and you can see the exact moment when he realizes the full scope of what you've become. It's not just the theft, it's the drugs, the dealing, the complete dissolution of everything he thought he knew about you. 3 years, he says quietly, after the magistrate's men have left with enough evidence to ensure prosecution. 3 years I trusted you. 3 years I made excuses for you, gave you chances, believed your stories about tooth pain. You want to explain. You want to tell him how it started, how it progressed, how every decision seemed reasonable at the time. But the words won't come. How do you explain addiction to someone who's never experienced it? How do you describe the way opium rewrites your brain, changes your priorities, makes the unthinkable seem necessary? "The tooth was real," you say finally. It's a pathetic defense, but it's all you have. "Was it?" he asks. "Because I've been thinking about that. I've been remembering. And I don't recall you ever actually having dental work done." He's right, of course. The tooth was pulled months ago, but you've been using it as an excuse for so long that you'd almost convinced yourself it was still causing problems. "I trusted you with my business," Master Whitmore continues. "I trusted you with my reputation. I trusted you with money that belonged to my family, my children's future. And you turned it into poison. That word hits harder than any of the others. Poison. Because that's exactly what laudanum has become for you. Not medicine, not relief, but poison that's slowly dissolving everything good in your life. The trial, when it comes, is a brief affair. The evidence is overwhelming, your guilt is undeniable, and your appearance in the dock speaks to moral dissolution that the court finds deeply troubling. The judge, a stern man with no patience for what he sees as weakness masquerading as medical necessity, sentences you to transportation to the American colonies. 7 years of indentured labor in Virginia, building someone else's fortune while working off your debt to society. It's a death sentence dressed up as mercy. Chapter 22. The Colonial Nightmare, when hell gets an upgrade. The ship that carries you to Virginia is a floating tomb packed with human cargo, 200 souls crammed into a space designed for maybe 50, all of them guilty of crimes that range from petty theft to political dissent, to the simple misfortune of being poor in a society that criminalized poverty. You're chained in the hold with murderers and rapists, but also with debtors and political prisoners, and women whose only crime was being unable to feed their children. The democracy of desperation makes strange bedfellows. The voyage takes 8 weeks, and every day is a fresh hell. The food is rotten, the water is contaminated, and disease spreads through the ship like wildfire. Dysentery, typhus, and scurvy kill passengers daily. Bodies are thrown overboard with less ceremony than would be given to disposing of garbage. But for you, the physical horrors of the journey pale in comparison to the psychological torture of withdrawal. Your supply of laudanum was confiscated when you were arrested, and there's no possibility of obtaining more on board ship. You go through withdrawal in chains, surrounded by dying strangers, in conditions that would break a healthy person. The shaking, sweating, and nausea that you're familiar with are amplified by malnutrition and stress. You hallucinate conversations with dead friends. You're convinced that the other prisoners are plotting to kill you. You spend days at a time unable to tell whether you're awake or dreaming. The ship's surgeon, and I use the term very loosely, is a drunk who treats everything from broken bones to bubonic plague with bloodletting and prayer. When you beg him for something, anything, to help with your condition, he looks at you with the contempt reserved for the morally weak. Withdrawal from spirits? He asks, misdiagnosing your condition entirely. Prayer and fortitude, that's your cure. Ask God for strength and stop being weak. He has no understanding of opiate addiction, no knowledge of withdrawal symptoms, and no interest in learning. To him, you're just another criminal making excuses for your moral failings. 3 weeks into the voyage, you're delirious with fever and convinced that the rats in the hold are speaking to you in the voice of your dead mother. This is when you meet Samuel, a forger from Birmingham who's serving his own 7-year sentence. Samuel has been watching you deteriorate, and unlike the ship's surgeon, he recognizes the signs of opiate withdrawal. He's seen it before in the opium dens of London's Limehouse district. Medicine sickness, he says quietly, crouching beside your hammock. You're sick from lack of medicine, not from any disease. It's the first time anyone has correctly identified your condition, and the relief of being understood is almost overwhelming. Samuel explains what's happening to your body, why you feel the way you do, and most importantly, that it will eventually end. How long? You ask through chattering teeth. The worst of it? Maybe another week or two. But you'll feel wrong for months, maybe years, maybe forever. He shrugs. I've seen men come through it. I've seen men die from it. It depends on how strong you are underneath all the poison. Samuel becomes your anchor to sanity during the remainder of the voyage. He shares his meager rations when you can't keep food down. He tells you stories when the hallucinations get too vivid. He sits beside you during the worst of the night terrors when you're convinced that everyone on the ship is conspiring to throw you overboard. Most importantly, he helps you understand what addiction actually is. Not a moral failing, not a sign of weak character, but a medical condition that changes how your brain works. This knowledge doesn't cure you, but it gives you a framework for understanding your experience that's based on reality rather than shame. Chapter 23. The Plantation Reality, when freedom becomes a relative concept. Virginia in 1688 is not the romantic colonial paradise depicted in later American mythology. It's a brutal frontier society built on the backs of enslaved people and indentured servants, where human life is valued primarily for its economic output. You're sold, yes, sold like a piece of livestock, to a tobacco plantation owner named Richard Thornton. Master Thornton is a second-generation colonist who's built his fortune on tobacco exports and human suffering. He owns 50 enslaved Africans, 20 indentured servants, and enough land to stretch beyond the horizon. Your new home is a wooden barracks that houses 12 indentured servants in conditions that make your London room look luxurious. The building has no windows, no insulation, and gaps between the boards that let in wind, rain, and whatever insects feel like joining the party. Your fellow servants are a mix of criminals, debtors, and voluntary immigrants who sold themselves into bondage for passage to America. There's Mary, a pickpocket from Dublin who's serving 5 years for stealing a handkerchief. There's Willem, a Dutch farmer who indentured himself to escape religious persecution. There's James, a political prisoner who made the mistake of supporting the wrong side in some forgotten English conflict. And then there's Caesar, an enslaved man who serves as the plantation's overseer and who holds more practical authority than any of the white indentured servants. The work is backbreaking. Tobacco cultivation requires constant attention: planting, weeding, harvesting, curing, packing. The plants themselves are fragile and prone to disease. but they're also the plantation's entire economic foundation. A bad harvest means financial ruin for Master Thornton and starvation for everyone who depends on him. You work from dawn to dusk, 6 days a week, with Sundays reserved for mandatory religious services and whatever personal maintenance you can squeeze in. Your hands, which once held quills and copied elegant documents, now grip hoes and carry bundles of tobacco leaves until they bleed. But here's the strange thing. For the first time in months, you're not constantly thinking about laudanum. Oh, you still want it. You still dream about it. Sometimes you wake up thinking you can smell that distinctive bittersweet aroma, only to realize it's just the tobacco curing in the barns. But the craving isn't the all-consuming obsession it once was. Partly, this is because there's no laudanum available. The nearest apothecary is 50 miles away in Williamsburg, and even if you could reach it, you have no money and no freedom to travel. The complete impossibility of obtaining the drug forces your brain to stop planning how to get it. Partly, it's because the physical demands of plantation work leave you too exhausted for complex emotional states. When you collapse into your straw mattress each night, you're too tired for anything except sleep. And partly, it's because you're gradually remembering who you used to be before laudanum took over your life. Chapter 24, The Slow Healing, When Rock Bottom Becomes a Foundation. 6 months into your indenture, something unexpected happens. You start to feel human again. It's not a dramatic transformation. There's no moment of sudden clarity, no flash of insight that changes everything. Instead, it's like watching the sun rise, so gradual that you don't notice it happening until you realize the world is lighter than it was. Your hands stop shaking, your sleep improves. The constant anxiety that's been your companion for so long begins to ease. You start taking interest in things beyond your own immediate needs, the weather, the crops, the conversations of your fellow servants. Caesar, the plantation overseer, notices the change before you do. You're looking less like death, he observes one evening as you're both checking the tobacco barns for signs of moisture damage. When you first arrived, I gave you 2 months before you died or ran away. What changed your estimate, you ask? You stopped looking like you were waiting for something, he says. First few months, you kept glancing around like you expected someone to arrive with good news. Now you just look like someone who's where he is. It's an astute observation. You have stopped waiting for rescue, for relief, for some external solution to your problems. For the first time in years, you're fully present in your own life, however unpleasant that life might be. This presence allows you to start noticing things you'd missed before, like the fact that Caesar, despite being enslaved, is one of the most intelligent and capable people you've ever met. He can read and write, skills he learned in secret since teaching enslaved people literacy is illegal in Virginia. He understands tobacco cultivation better than Master Thornton. He manages the complex logistics of plantation life with an efficiency that would impress any London merchant. How do you bear it? You ask him one day, genuinely curious. Being in your situation, Caesar looks at you for a long moment, weighing whether you're worth an honest answer. Same way you bear yours, he says finally. One day at a time. But the difference is, I never chose this. You poisoned yourself into slavery. I was born into it. It's a harsh but fair assessment. Your addiction didn't just destroy your own life. It led you to choices that resulted in your current bondage. Caesar's enslavement is an injustice imposed upon him. Yours is a consequence of decisions you made. This distinction becomes important as you start to think about the future. Caesar dreams of freedom, but knows it may never come. You know your freedom will come in 6.5 years, assuming you survive that long. But you're beginning to understand that freedom isn't just about the absence of chains. Chapter 25. The education of addiction, when understanding becomes power. Your education in the true nature of addiction comes from an unexpected source. Dr. Marcus Webb, a physician who visits the plantation quarterly to tend to the medical needs of Master Thornton's human property. Dr. Webb is unusual among colonial physicians in that he's actually studied medicine formally at Edinburgh University, rather than just apprenticing to someone who once met a real doctor. He's also unusual in that he treats enslaved people and indentured servants with the same care he provides to free whites, a radical approach that has earned him both respect and suspicion in Virginia society. During his autumn visit, he notices the tremor in your hands and the way you flinch from sudden movements. Nervous condition? He asks, examining your reflexes with practiced precision. I used to take laudanum, you admit, for a tooth, but I haven't had any in over a year now. Dr. Webb's eyebrows rise with interest. And before you stopped, how much were you taking? You describe your usage pattern, from the initial medical doses to the final desperate binges. Dr. Webb listens without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timing, quantities, and symptoms. Fascinating, he says when you finish. You're describing what the Edinburgh physicians are calling habituation, a condition where the body becomes dependent on a medicine beyond its therapeutic value. This is the first time you've heard addiction described in medical rather than moral terms, and it's revelatory. Is it curable, you ask? The physical dependence can be overcome, as you've demonstrated, Dr. Webb explains. But the mental patterns, those may persist indefinitely. The tendency to seek chemical solutions to life's problems, the belief that suffering is intolerable and must be immediately relieved, these patterns of thinking can remain long after the body has healed. He goes on to explain the emerging medical understanding of how opium affects the brain, how tolerance develops, why withdrawal is so difficult, and why people like you often relapse even after successful detoxification. The key insight, he says, is that this is not a moral failing but a medical condition. However, it's a medical condition that can only be managed through moral choices. No physician can cure you of the desire to escape reality. Only you can learn to tolerate reality without chemical assistance. This conversation changes everything. For the first time, you have a framework for understanding your experience that's both scientifically accurate and personally empowering. You're not weak or evil. You have a medical condition. But you're also not helpless. You have the power to manage that condition through your daily choices. Chapter 26. The question of character when addiction becomes education. As your indenture progresses, you begin to notice patterns in how different people respond to adversity, and these observations become a kind of informal education in human nature. Some of your fellow servants break under the strain. Willem, the Dutch farmer, becomes increasingly bitter and paranoid, convinced that everyone is plotting against him. He picks fights with the other servants, refuses to follow Caesar's instructions, and eventually attempts to escape. An effort that ends with him being severely flogged and having 2 years added to his term of service. Others adapt with remarkable resilience. Mary, the Irish pickpocket, approaches plantation life with the same practical cunning she used on Dublin streets. She identifies which tasks are easiest, which overseers are most lenient, and how to trade small favors for better food or easier work assignments. She's not happy, but she's surviving with her dignity intact. And then there are people like James, the political prisoner, who somehow find meaning in their suffering. James uses his enforced exile to write letters, journals, political treatises that he hides carefully and plans to publish after his release. He's turned his bondage into an opportunity for intellectual development. You find yourself somewhere in the middle of this spectrum. You're not broken like Willem, not cunning like Mary, not transcendent like James, but you're learning something valuable, how to live with discomfort without needing to escape from it immediately. This is perhaps the most important skill you could develop as a recovering addict. The ability to experience physical pain, emotional distress, boredom, anxiety, and sadness without immediately reaching for chemical relief. It's not that you enjoy suffering, you're not a masochist, but you're learning that most suffering is temporary and survivable, and that the attempts to avoid it often cause more problems than the original discomfort. When your back aches from a day of heavy labor, you don't immediately think, I need medicine. You think, this will feel better after I rest. When you feel homesick for London, you don't think, I need something to make this stop. You think this feeling will pass. These small shifts in thinking represent massive progress in recovery from addiction. Instead of seeing discomfort as an emergency that requires immediate chemical intervention, you're learning to see it as a normal part of human existence that can be endured and will eventually change. Chapter 27. The unexpected opportunity. When expertise becomes valuable. In your 4th year of indenture, Master Thornton faces a problem that your particular background makes you uniquely qualified to solve. The plantation's finances are in chaos. The previous bookkeeper, a free white man named Henderson, has been embezzling money through a complex scheme involving false invoices and fictional tobacco sales. When the fraud is discovered, Henderson flees to the frontier, leaving behind records that are either incomplete or deliberately misleading. Master Thornton needs someone who can untangle the mess, reconstruct accurate accounts, and establish new systems for financial record keeping. He also needs someone he can trust, a significant challenge, given that his last bookkeeper robbed him blind. Caesar suggests you for the position. Thomas was a clerk in London, he tells Master Thornton. Good with numbers and writing, knows how businesses work. It's a risky recommendation for Caesar to make. If you fail or prove untrustworthy, it reflects badly on his judgment. But Caesar has been watching you for 4 years, and he's concluded that your experience with addiction has actually made you more trustworthy, not less. Man who's been to the bottom knows what it costs to fall, he explains to you privately. You're not going to risk what you've built here for quick profit. Master Thornton is skeptical but desperate. His plantation's financial problems are serious enough to threaten bankruptcy, and he can't afford to hire another professional bookkeeper who might turn out to be another Henderson. He offers you a deal. Take over the plantation's books, straighten out the mess, and establish reliable systems for ongoing record keeping. In exchange, he'll reduce your remaining term of indenture from 3 years to 1 year, and provide you with a letter of recommendation that will help you find employment after your release. It's an opportunity you couldn't have imagined when you first arrived in Virginia as a broken, withdrawing addict. And it's an opportunity that exists precisely because of what you've learned through the experience of addiction and recovery. You accept. Chapter 28. The Redemption Project. When skills return. Working with numbers, again, feels like rediscovering a lost language. Your hands, which have spent 4 years gripping farm tools, remember how to hold a quill properly. Your eyes, accustomed to scanning tobacco fields for signs of disease, readjust to examining columns of figures for mathematical relationships. But this isn't just a return to your old skills. It's an application of those skills enhanced by hard-won wisdom about human nature, motivation, and the ways people rationalize harmful behavior. Henderson's embezzlement scheme is sophisticated but not ingenious. He created fictional buyers for tobacco shipments, generated false invoices for supplies that were never purchased, and manipulated shipping records to hide the discrepancies. It's the kind of fraud that requires both accounting knowledge and a willingness to lie consistently over an extended period. As you unravel the deception, you recognize something familiar in Henderson's methods: the elaborate justifications, the small initial compromises that led to larger ones, the growing desperation that drove increasingly risky behavior. It's the same pattern you followed with laudanum, just applied to money instead of drugs. Henderson probably started by borrowing small amounts with the intention of paying them back. When that became impossible, he created false records to hide the borrowing. When the false records became too complex to maintain, he stole larger amounts to buy time. Eventually, the whole system became unsustainable, and he fled rather than face the consequences. It's addiction applied to theft instead of substances, the same psychological mechanisms driving different behaviors. This insight helps you design systems that will prevent future embezzlement. Instead of relying solely on trust or oversight, you create procedures that make fraud mathematically obvious and practically difficult. You establish cross-referenced record-keeping systems where shipping records, inventory counts, and financial accounts must all align. You create regular audit procedures that would quickly reveal discrepancies. Most importantly, you design the system so that no single person, including yourself, has enough access to manipulate records without detection. Master Thornton is impressed by both your technical skills and your understanding of human weakness. You think like a thief, he observes, but you build systems like someone who's learned not to trust thieves. It's an accurate assessment. Your experience with addiction has given you insights into the ways people rationalize harmful behavior, and your recovery has taught you the importance of creating external structures that support good choices and make bad choices more difficult. Chapter 29, The Philosophy of Redemption, When Experience Becomes Wisdom. As your term of indenture nears its end, you find yourself reflecting on the strange journey that brought you from London, clerk to Virginia plantation to whatever comes next. The experience has been brutal, but it's also been educational in ways you couldn't have anticipated. You've learned that addiction is both a medical condition and a moral challenge, that understanding the chemistry of dependence doesn't absolve you of responsibility for your choices, but it does help you make better choices going forward. You've learned that hitting bottom can be the beginning of wisdom, that sometimes you have to lose everything before you can see clearly what's worth having. You've learned that redemption is possible but not guaranteed, that the opportunity to rebuild your life is a gift that must be earned daily through small, consistent choices. Most importantly, you've learned that your worst experiences can become your greatest strengths if you're willing to extract their lessons rather than just survive their pain. Dr. Webb, during his final visit before your release, puts it in medical terms. Addiction creates a kind of expertise in human suffering that, properly channeled, can be enormously valuable to society. You now understand things about desperation, rationalization, and recovery that most people never learn. The question is what you'll do with that knowledge. It's a question you've been considering seriously. Your indenture has taught you that you're capable of more than you thought, not just surviving hardship, but finding meaning and purpose within it. Your work on the plantation's financial systems has reminded you that you have valuable skills that weren't destroyed by addiction, just temporarily overwhelmed by it. But perhaps most importantly, your conversations with Caesar have taught you about different kinds of freedom. Caesar has shown you that external bondage doesn't necessarily mean internal defeat, and that true liberty involves more than just the absence of legal constraints. Freedom, Caesar told you recently, isn't about having no master. It's about choosing your master wisely. You can serve money, or drink, or the opinions of others, or your own worst impulses. Or you can serve something better: family, community, principles that matter. It's a profound insight from someone who has never been legally free, but who has achieved a kind of spiritual liberty that many free people never attain. Chapter 30, The Return to the World. When the test begins, your release from indenture comes on a cold February morning in 1695. Master Thornton provides you with the promised letter of recommendation, a set of decent clothes, and £50 sterling, payment for your work on the plantation's financial systems. It's more money than you had when you left London, and more importantly, it's money you've earned through honest work rather than theft or drug dealing. But freedom, you discover, is both a gift and a challenge. For 7 years, your choices have been limited by circumstances: where to sleep, what to eat, how to spend your time. Now you have options again, and options can be dangerous for someone with your history. You could book passage back to England, but London holds too many memories and too many opportunities for relapse. You could head west to the frontier, where questions about your past would be rare, but frontier life offers its own forms of lawlessness and temptation. Instead, you decide to stay in Virginia, in the small port town of Norfolk, where you can use your skills without being overwhelmed by the urban pressures that contributed to your original downfall. You find employment with a merchant company that trades between the Chesapeake and the Caribbean. It's similar to your old work in London, managing accounts, tracking shipments, handling correspondence, but with an important difference. Your employer, Samuel Morrison, is a Quaker who believes in second chances and who values competence over social standing. Morrison knows about your past, your criminal conviction, your transportation, your history of addiction, but he also knows about your recent work, your skills with numbers, and your understanding of business systems. The past informs the present, but need not determine the future, he tells you during your hiring interview. Thee has knowledge of both failure and recovery. That combination may prove valuable in commerce, where both honesty and understanding of temptation are essential. Your new life in Norfolk is modest but stable. You rent a small room above a baker's shop, take your meals at a tavern that serves food rather than just alcohol, and spend your evenings reading or walking along the harbor. It's not exciting, but excitement was part of what got you into trouble in the first place. You're learning to find satisfaction in routine, stability, and the slow accumulation of respectability. Chapter 31, The Relapse Temptation, When Old Demons Return. 6 months into your new life in Norfolk, you face your first serious test. A ship arrives from London carrying among its cargo a passenger who recognizes you from your old life. Thomas Hartwell was a fellow clerk who worked for a rival merchant house, and he remembers you from before your fall. "Thomas," he calls out when he spots you on the dock. "Good Lord, what brings you to Virginia? Last I heard there were rumors about some trouble with the law." Hartwell is genuinely pleased to see a familiar face in a foreign land, but his presence forces you to confront questions you've been avoiding. How much should you reveal about your past? How do you explain your current circumstances to someone who knew you before? More troubling, Hartwell brings news from London that stirs up memories you've tried to suppress. Master Fletcher, the apothecary, has died of consumption. The Blue Boar Tavern has been closed by the authorities after a fatal brawl. Several of your old drinking companions have died, some from disease, some from accidents, some from causes that Hartwell delicately describes as suspicious circumstances. But enough about such grim matters, Hartwell says brightly. I've brought some excellent medicines from London. Proper English remedies, not the crude colonial preparations, including some fine laudanum from Master Fletcher's successor. Perhaps you'd join me for dinner and we could share a bottle, for old times' sake? The offer hits you like a physical blow. For 6 months, you've successfully avoided situations that might trigger cravings. You've built routines, chosen associates carefully, and created an environment that supports your recovery. But now, suddenly, you're faced with the exact substance that destroyed your life, offered by someone who remembers you from happier times, in a social context that makes refusal seem rude or suspicious. Your first instinct is to say yes. The craving, dormant but not dead, wakes up with startling intensity. You can almost taste the bitter, sweet mixture, almost feel that familiar warm embrace spreading through your chest. But 7 years of hard-won wisdom intervenes. I appreciate the offer, you say carefully, but I find that such medicines disagree with me these days. Perhaps we could share a meal and some decent wine instead. Hartwell looks puzzled, but agrees, and you spend the evening catching up on news from London while carefully steering the conversation away from topics that might lead back to laudanum. It's not easy. Hartwell is full of stories about mutual acquaintances, many of whom you remember as fellow users of various medicines. He describes the latest trends in pharmaceutical preparations with the enthusiasm of someone who sees them as harmless social lubricants rather than potentially dangerous drugs. But you get through the evening without compromising your recovery, and more importantly, you learn something valuable about yourself. The craving is still there, but it no longer controls your behavior. You can acknowledge the desire without acting on it. Chapter 32, The Helper's High, When Experience Becomes Service. Your real breakthrough in recovery comes not from avoiding temptation, but from helping others face it. A year after Hartwell's visit, a new indentured servant arrives in Norfolk aboard a ship from London. William Porter is a former apothecary's assistant who was transported for stealing medicines, specifically large quantities of laudanum that he was consuming rather than selling. Porter arrives in the same condition you remember from your own transportation, shaking, sweating, delusional, and convinced that he's dying of some mysterious illness that only laudanum can cure. The ship's captain, looking for someone to take responsibility for what he clearly considers damaged cargo, asks around the docks for anyone with experience managing difficult indentured servants. Your name comes up. I understand thee has experience with such conditions, Morrison tells you. Would thee be willing to assist this fellow? The work would be in addition to thy regular duties, of course, and appropriately compensated. You agree, partly out of compassion for Porter's obvious suffering, but mostly because you're curious to see if your hard-won understanding of addiction can actually help someone else. Porter's withdrawal follows the same pattern you remember from your own experience, but seeing it from the outside provides new insights. The physical symptoms, shaking, sweating, nausea, are obvious and dramatic, but the psychological symptoms are what really drive the desperation. Porter is convinced that he's dying. He can't sleep because of anxiety. He can't eat because of nausea. He can't think clearly because of confusion and depression. Every sensation feels amplified and threatening. Most importantly, he has no framework for understanding what's happening to him. Like you 7 years ago, he thinks he has a medical condition that requires medication, not a medical condition caused by medication. You start by explaining what withdrawal actually is. Not a sign of underlying illness, but evidence that his body is healing from chemical dependence. You describe the timeline of symptoms, when they'll peak, when they'll start to improve. How long? He asks, the same question you asked Samuel on the transport ship. The worst of it will be over in 2 weeks, you tell him. But feeling completely normal, that might take months, maybe longer, but it will happen if you let it. Over the following weeks, you help Porter through the physical and psychological challenges of early recovery. You share practical strategies for managing symptoms. You help him understand the difference between physical discomfort and actual danger. Most importantly, you give him hope that recovery is possible because you're living proof that it works. The experience teaches you something unexpected. Helping someone else recover actually strengthens your own recovery. Explaining the principles of addiction and recovery to Porter helps you understand them more clearly yourself. Seeing his progress reminds you of how far you've come. But perhaps most importantly, having someone depend on your wisdom and experience gives you a sense of purpose that pure self-preservation couldn't provide. Chapter 33, The Business of Recovery, When Healing Becomes a Profession. Porter's successful recovery attracts attention in Norfolk's small but growing community of merchants, ship captains, and colonial officials. Word spreads that you have unusual expertise in helping people overcome dependence on various substances, not just laudanum, but alcohol, tobacco, and other medicines that sometimes become more problem than solution. This expertise turns out to be valuable in a colonial society where medical resources are scarce and understanding of addiction is limited. Ships regularly arrive, carrying passengers or crew members who are struggling with substance dependence. Plantation owners occasionally find themselves dealing with workers whose medical conditions are interfering with productivity. Morrison suggests that you formalize this expertise by offering consulting services to other merchants and ship owners who are dealing with similar problems. Thee has developed knowledge that others lack, he points out. Why not make it available to those who need it for appropriate compensation? It's an intriguing proposition. You could build a business around helping people recover from addiction while supporting yourself through honest work that uses your hard-won expertise. But it's also a risky proposition. Advertising your knowledge of addiction means publicly acknowledging your own history with it. In a society where reputation is everything, this could limit your opportunities in other areas. After careful consideration, you decide to proceed, but cautiously. You don't advertise publicly, but you let it be known through Morrison's network that you're available to help with difficult cases involving medical dependencies. Your first paying client is a ship captain whose first mate has become unreliable due to excessive use of rum mixed with laudanum, a combination popular among sailors because it provides both intoxication and pain relief, but which often leads to addiction. Your second client is a plantation owner whose overseer has been stealing and selling medical supplies while claiming to treat his own chronic pain. Your third client is a wealthy merchant whose son has been spending the family fortune on imported opium and other exotic substances. Each case teaches you something new about the varieties of addiction and the strategies that work for different people in different circumstances. You develop a systematic approach that combines medical understanding, practical support, and what you privately think of as spiritual counseling, helping people find meaning and purpose that can compete with the artificial satisfactions of drug use. Within 2 years, you have more requests for help than you can handle while maintaining your regular duties with Morrison's company. Chapter 34, The Philosophy of Redemption in Practice. When theory meets reality. By 1699, you've helped more than 20 people overcome various forms of substance dependence with a success rate that amazes even you. Not everyone succeeds. Addiction is too complex and individual for any universal cure, but enough people recover to establish your reputation as someone who understands both the problem and its solutions. Your approach has evolved into something that combines medical knowledge, practical psychology, and what can only be called wisdom earned through suffering. You start with education, helping people understand what addiction actually is, not a moral failing or a sign of weak character, but a medical condition that hijacks the brain's reward systems. This removes the shame that often prevents people from seeking help. You continue with practical support, helping people manage withdrawal symptoms, avoid triggers, and rebuild their daily routines around recovery rather than substance use. But the core of your approach is what you call meaning replacement, helping people find sources of satisfaction, purpose, and identity that can compete with the artificial rewards of drug use. For Porter, this meant learning to read and write so he could eventually become a clerk or bookkeeper rather than remaining an unskilled laborer. For the ship captain's first mate, it meant developing expertise in navigation that made him valuable for reasons beyond his ability to follow orders. For the merchant's son, it meant finding a role in the family business that gave him responsibility and respect. The insight that drives this approach is simple but profound. Addiction fills a void in people's lives, and lasting recovery requires filling that void with something else. Simply removing the substance without replacing its psychological function leads to relapse. You've also learned that successful recovery often requires changing not just individual behavior, but social circumstances. People who return to the same environment, the same associates, and the same daily routines that surrounded their addiction often find it impossible to maintain recovery. This is why your own recovery succeeded in Virginia, but might have failed in London. The complete change of environment forced you to develop new patterns, new relationships, and new sources of meaning. Your reputation eventually attracts the attention of Dr. Webb, the Edinburgh-trained physician who first helped you understand addiction in medical terms. He travels to Norfolk specifically to discuss your work and to learn from your practical experience. What you've developed, he tells you after observing your methods, is perhaps the most sophisticated approach to treating habituation that I've encountered anywhere. The combination of medical understanding and practical psychology is remarkable. Chapter 35. The full circle, when the student becomes the teacher. In 1702, 15 years after you left London as a broken addict and convicted thief, you receive an unexpected letter. It's from Master Whitmore, your former employer, written in the careful handwriting you remember from contract negotiations. The letter is formal but not unfriendly. Master Whitmore has learned of your whereabouts through business connections, and he's writing to inform you that he's been asked to provide a character reference for someone seeking passage to Virginia. The someone is Samuel, the forger from Birmingham, who helped you through withdrawal on the transport ship. Samuel has completed his own 7-year term of indenture and is looking to establish himself in legitimate business in the colonies. I have no personal knowledge of this man's character, Master Whitmore writes, but he claims that you can vouch for his integrity and capabilities. Given your own history, I was uncertain how to respond to this request. I would be grateful for your assessment of this Samuel's worthiness of recommendation. The letter represents a complete reversal of roles. The man you once robbed is now asking for your opinion on someone else's trustworthiness. The employer who dismissed you in disgrace is now treating you as a respectable member of the business community. You write back immediately, providing Samuel with the strongest possible recommendation. You describe his character, his intelligence, his loyalty, and his understanding of what it means to build a life after hitting bottom. But you also include something unexpected, an acknowledgement of your own past actions and an apology for the harm you caused. I am well aware, you write, that my behavior in your employ was inexcusable and that the theft I committed violated not only the law but your personal trust. No explanation can justify such actions, though I now understand that they resulted from a medical condition that I was ill-equipped to recognize or manage at the time. I have spent the intervening years working to rebuild not only my own life, but to help others avoid the path of destruction that I once followed. I hope that this work, in some small way, balances the scales of the harm I once caused. Master Whitmore's reply arrives 3 months later, and it contains something you never expected: forgiveness. Your letter demonstrates a maturity and self-awareness that was absent during your employment here, he writes. I am pleased to learn that you have found both redemption and purpose in your new circumstances. Consider our account settled, and your friend Samuel will receive the strongest recommendation I can provide. The exchange teaches you something important about redemption. It's not just about changing your own life, but about repairing the damage your actions cause to others. True recovery requires not just stopping harmful behavior, but actively working to undo its consequences. Chapter 36. The Legacy. Question. When present success meets future responsibility. By 1705, your consulting practice has grown beyond what you can handle alone. You've trained 3 assistants, all people who have successfully overcome their own substance dependencies, and you're considering expanding to other colonial cities. But success brings new challenges and responsibilities. You have clients who depend on your continued availability. You have assistants whose livelihoods depend on the business you've built. Most importantly, you have a body of knowledge and experience that could help many more people if it could be systematized and shared. Dr. Webb, who has become both a professional colleague and a personal friend, suggests that you consider writing a book about your approach to treating addiction. The methods you've developed could be invaluable to physicians throughout the colonies in Europe, he argues. Most medical practitioners still see habituation as a moral problem rather than a medical condition. Your insights could change how the medical profession approaches these cases. The idea is both exciting and terrifying. Writing a book would mean publicly acknowledging your own history with addiction in detail. It would mean describing not just your recovery, but your fall, the theft, the deception, the complete moral collapse that led to your transportation. But it would also mean creating something that could help people long after you're gone, something that could prevent others from experiencing the suffering you went through. You begin working on the manuscript in your spare time, starting with what you think will be a simple manual of practical techniques. But as you write, the project evolves into something more comprehensive. Part medical treatise, part psychological analysis, part moral philosophy, and part personal memoir. The title you settle on is The Medicine Sickness, a complete account of the nature, causes, and cure of habituation to opium and other substances based on personal experience and practical observation. The book's introduction sets its unusual tone. The author of this work writes not as a physician trained in the universities, though he has learned much from such men, nor as a philosopher educated in the principles of moral science, though he has pondered deeply such questions. He writes as one who has experienced the condition he describes from the inside, who has descended to its lowest depths and found his way back to the light of reason and respectability. You describe your methodology honestly. The treatments herein described are based not on theoretical knowledge, but on practical experience with more than 50 cases of various forms of habituation. Some of these cases ended in complete recovery, some in partial improvement, and some, regrettably, in failure. The author has endeavored to learn from all outcomes and to distinguish between methods that consistently succeed and those that merely sometimes work. The book's most controversial chapter deals with what you call the moral dimension of medical treatment. You argue that while addiction is indeed a medical condition, recovery requires moral choices that no physician can make for the patient. The habituation rewrites the sufferer's priorities, making the procurement and consumption of the substance seem more important than family, work, honor, or even survival. Recovery requires not just the removal of the substance from the body, but the restoration of proper priorities to the mind. This restoration cannot be accomplished through medical treatment alone, but requires the deliberate cultivation of virtues that oppose the vices encouraged by habituation. Chapter 37, The Controversy and the Critics. When Truth Meets Resistance. When your book is published in 1708, it creates exactly the kind of controversy you expected, but from unexpected directions. The medical establishment, particularly in London, reacts with skepticism bordering on hostility. Dr. Cornelius Hartwell, no relation to your old acquaintance, of the Royal College of Physicians, writes a scathing review dismissing your work as the uninformed speculation of a transported criminal who presumes to instruct his betters in matters of medicine. That this person has apparently overcome his own moral failings is commendable, Dr. Hartwell continues, but hardly qualifies him to prescribe treatments for others. The suggestion that habituation is a medical condition, rather than a failure of character, contradicts centuries of moral teaching and threatens to excuse vice as illness. Other physicians are more receptive, particularly those who have actually encountered cases of substance dependence in their practices. Dr. James Morton of Edinburgh writes that your book provides the first systematic approach to a condition that has long puzzled the medical profession. The combination of scientific observation and practical experience offers insights unavailable through theoretical study alone. But the most unexpected criticism comes from some of your own former clients. A few people you've helped to recover object to your public discussion of addiction, fearing that your book will make their own histories more visible. William Porter, whose recovery launched your consulting career, writes to express his concerns. While I am grateful beyond measure for your assistance, I fear that this book draws unwanted attention to conditions that are better left private. Not all of us wish to be publicly associated with such matters, even in the context of recovery. It's a valid concern and one you've anticipated. You've changed names and details throughout the book to protect people's privacy, but you acknowledge that some readers might recognize themselves or others in your case studies. More troubling are the letters from people who interpret your book as permission to continue using substances as long as they call it medical treatment. These readers have missed your central point entirely, focusing on your description of addiction as a medical condition while ignoring your emphasis on the need for complete abstinence and lifestyle change. You find yourself in the strange position of having to argue against misinterpretations of your own work, clarifying that calling addiction a medical condition doesn't make continued drug use medically appropriate. Chapter 38, The Unexpected Allies, When Opposition Creates Support. The controversy surrounding your book has an unintended consequence. It brings you to the attention of people who might otherwise never have heard of your work. Religious leaders, particularly Quakers and other reformist groups, find in your approach a bridge between medical science and moral teaching that appeals to their understanding of human nature. They appreciate your emphasis on personal responsibility within a framework of compassionate understanding. Samuel Morrison, your Quaker employer, organizes a speaking tour that takes you to meetings throughout the mid-Atlantic colonies. You find yourself addressing congregations about the nature of addiction, the possibility of redemption, and the importance of community support in helping people overcome destructive behaviors. These speeches force you to articulate your ideas in new ways, adapting medical and psychological concepts for audiences who think primarily in spiritual terms. You develop what becomes known as the Norfolk approach, a synthesis of medical treatment, practical psychology, and moral guidance that emphasizes both the reality of addiction as a condition and the necessity of individual choice in recovery. Your most powerful ally turns out to be an unexpected one, Caesar, the former plantation overseer who played such an important role in your own recovery. Caesar has purchased his freedom and established himself as a successful merchant in Charleston, South Carolina. When he learns about your book and the controversy surrounding it, he writes a public letter that's published in several colonial newspapers. I knew Thomas when he was broken by his condition and when he rebuilt himself through determination and proper guidance, Caesar writes. I have seen many men destroyed by various substances, and I have seen few recover as completely as he has. His understanding of these matters comes not from books, but from experience, and his methods work because they address both the body and the spirit. Those who criticize him for speaking of matters they have not experienced would do better to listen and learn. Caesar's endorsement carries weight because it comes from someone whose own triumph over adversity commands respect throughout the colonial business community. His letter shifts the conversation from, should a former addict be giving medical advice, to, can we afford to ignore insights that clearly work? Chapter 39, The Teaching Mission, When Knowledge Becomes Responsibility. By 1710, the demand for your expertise has grown beyond what you can meet through individual consulting or even book sales. Medical colleges are inviting you to lecture. Colonial governments are asking for advice on policies related to substance importation and regulation. Ship captains and plantation owners want training for their crews and overseers in recognizing and managing addiction among their workers. You make the decision to establish what you call the Norfolk Institute for the Treatment of Habituation, a formal school that trains physicians, clergy, and other professionals in evidence-based approaches to addiction treatment. The Institute's curriculum combines medical education with practical training. Students learn about the physiological effects of various substances, the psychology of addiction and recovery, and the social factors that contribute to both problems and solutions. But the heart of the program is what you call experiential learning. Students work directly with people in recovery, observing the treatment process, and gradually taking on responsibility for client care under careful supervision. Your teaching methodology is as controversial as your treatment approach. Traditional medical education relies heavily on book learning and observation of established physicians. Your approach emphasizes direct experience, systematic observation, and adaptation of methods based on results rather than tradition. Medicine is not theology, you tell your students. We are not here to defend ancient authorities, but to discover what actually works. If a treatment consistently fails, we must be willing to abandon it regardless of how prestigious its advocates might be. If a treatment consistently succeeds, we must be willing to adopt it, regardless of how unconventional it might seem. This pragmatic approach attracts students who are frustrated with the limitations of traditional medical training, but it also creates tension with established medical authorities who see it as a challenge to their expertise and status. The controversy reaches a peak when the Royal College of Physicians formally petitions the colonial governments to close your institute, arguing that you're practicing medicine without proper credentials and endangering public health by teaching unproven methods. The petition fails, largely because colonial officials have seen the results of your work firsthand. Governor Alexander Spotswood of Virginia writes in response, Mr. Thomas has demonstrated through practical results that his methods are both safe and effective. While his credentials may be unconventional, his outcomes speak for themselves. Virginia will continue to support educational endeavors that serve the public good, regardless of their sponsors' opinions in London. Chapter 40, The Personal Reckoning, When Success Meets Mortality. In 1715, at the age of 52, you receive news that forces you to confront your own mortality in a new way. Dr. Webb, who has been both mentor and friend for nearly 2 decades, is dying of consumption, the same disease that killed Master Fletcher, your original apothecary. As you sit beside Webb's deathbed, he shares reflections that profoundly influence your thinking about legacy and purpose. I have spent my life treating diseases of the body, he says, his voice weak, but his mind still sharp. But you have spent yours treating diseases of the spirit. I think perhaps your work will prove more lasting than mine. The conversation leads you to consider what you want to accomplish with whatever years remain to you. The Institute is thriving. Your methods are being adopted throughout the colonies and even in Europe, and your book has been translated into French and German. But you're increasingly aware that institutional success isn't the same as personal fulfillment. You've spent 25 years helping other people overcome addiction. But you realize you've never fully processed your own experience or come to terms with the person you were before recovery. You begin writing what you privately think of as the real book, not a medical treatise or a practical manual, but an honest, complete account of your journey from respectability through degradation to redemption and service. This new manuscript is more personal and more vulnerable than anything you've written before. You describe not just the external events of your addiction and recovery, but the internal experience, the fear, the shame, the self-deception, and the gradual emergence of wisdom from suffering. I was not always the person who writes these words, you begin. I was once a man who would steal from those who trusted him, who would lie to those who loved him, who would risk everything decent in his life for a few moments of chemical relief from problems that were largely of his own making. I tell this story not to excuse such behavior, but to demonstrate that redemption is possible even from the deepest moral failure. The writing process becomes a form of therapy, forcing you to examine aspects of your experience that you've avoided confronting. You realize that despite 25 years of recovery, you've never fully forgiven yourself for the harm you caused others. This self-forgiveness, you discover, is perhaps the final stage of recovery, not because it erases the past, but because it allows you to fully embrace the present and future. Chapter 41, The Final Lessons, When Wisdom Completes Itself. Your personal memoir, published in 1718 under the title The Long Road Home, A True Account of Addiction, Recovery, and Redemption, becomes your most influential work, though not in ways you anticipated. Rather than being read primarily by medical professionals or addiction specialists, the book finds its largest audience among ordinary people struggling with various forms of personal failure and seeking examples of how lives can be rebuilt after catastrophic mistakes. You receive letters from debtors, criminals, failed merchants, broken families, and others who see in your story not just hope for recovery from substance addiction, but a model for overcoming any form of destructive behavior and rebuilding a meaningful life. One letter particularly moves you. It comes from a woman in Boston whose husband became addicted to alcohol and laudanum after a war injury, lost his business, and abandoned his family. Your book has shown me that my husband's condition is not a moral failing, but a sickness, she writes. More importantly, it has shown me that recovery is possible and what it looks like. I am sending your book to him in the hopes that he might recognize himself in your story and find the courage to seek help. You realize that your most important contribution may not be the specific techniques you've developed for treating addiction, but the simple demonstration that complete personal transformation is possible even after seemingly irreversible failure. This insight leads you to establish what becomes known as the Second Chance Society, a network of people committed to helping others rebuild their lives after various forms of personal catastrophe. The society provides practical assistance, job placement, housing, financial advice, combined with emotional support and moral guidance. The society's membership includes former addicts, but also former criminals, failed businessmen, abandoned spouses, and others who have experienced major life disruptions and found ways to rebuild. The common thread is not the nature of their original problems, but their commitment to helping others avoid or overcome similar difficulties. Chapter 42, The Circle Complete, When Endings Become Beginnings. In 1725, 38 years after leaving London as a broken addict, you receive an invitation that brings your journey full circle. The Royal College of Physicians, the same institution that once tried to shut down your work, invites you to deliver the annual Harveyian Oration, the college's most prestigious lecture. The invitation comes after decades of evidence that your methods work, and after traditional medical approaches to addiction have repeatedly failed. Even your harshest critics can no longer ignore the results you've achieved. Your lecture, titled The Medicine of Experience, What Suffering Can Teach About Healing, draws the largest audience in the oration's history. Physicians travel from across Europe to hear the former addict and convicted criminal who has revolutionized the treatment of substance dependence. You use the platform not to vindicate yourself against old criticisms, but to challenge the medical profession, to expand its understanding of healing itself. Medicine, you argue, has traditionally focused on fixing what is broken in the body, but many of the conditions we encounter cannot be cured by addressing physical symptoms alone. They require healing of the spirit, restoration of purpose, and reconstruction of meaning. This broader understanding of healing requires physicians to become not just scientists, but also counselors, teachers, and in some cases, living examples of the recovery they seek to promote. You conclude with reflections on the relationship between personal experience and professional expertise. I do not claim that suffering automatically produces wisdom, or that experience alone qualifies one to treat others, but I do claim that certain forms of knowledge can only be gained through direct experience, and that this experiential knowledge, when combined with scientific understanding and systematic observation, can produce insights unavailable through any other means. The oration is received with enthusiasm by many and skepticism by others, but it establishes your final transition from controversial outsider to respected authority. More importantly, it allows you to publicly acknowledge the debt you owe to all the people who helped you along the way. Samuel, who taught you that withdrawal was survivable. Caesar, who showed you that dignity could be maintained even in bondage. Dr. Webb, who provided the scientific framework for understanding your condition. Morrison, who gave you a chance to rebuild your reputation. And the dozens of clients whose recovery taught you that healing was possible for others as well as yourself. Chapter 43, The Reflection and the Legacy, when a life's work becomes clear. As you approach your 70th birthday in 1733, you find yourself in the unusual position of having outlived most of your contemporaries while maintaining both physical health and mental clarity. You attribute this longevity partly to the absence of substances that might have hastened your decline, but mostly to the sense of purpose that has sustained you through nearly 5 decades of recovery. Your work has evolved far beyond what you originally imagined. The Norfolk Institute now has branches in 6 colonial cities and has trained more than 200 practitioners. Your books have been translated into 8 languages and are used in medical schools throughout Europe and America. The Second Chance Society has helped thousands of people rebuild their lives after various forms of personal failure. But perhaps most significantly, your work has contributed to a fundamental shift in how society understands addiction and recovery. The moral model that dominated thinking when you first became addicted. The belief that substance dependence resulted from weak character and could be cured through willpower alone has gradually given way to a more nuanced understanding that combines medical, psychological, and social perspectives. This shift hasn't been universal or complete. Many physicians, clergy, and ordinary citizens still view addiction primarily as a moral failing. But there's now a significant body of opinion that sees it as a complex condition requiring comprehensive treatment rather than simple condemnation. You've also contributed to broader changes in criminal justice approaches to addiction-related crimes. Several colonial governments have established treatment programs as alternatives to transportation or imprisonment for people whose criminal behavior stems from substance dependence. Your personal story has become a template for what's now called recovery advocacy. The idea that people who have successfully overcome addiction have unique qualifications for helping others do the same. But as you reflect on these achievements, you're most proud of something less visible. The individual lives that have been saved and rebuilt through your work and the work of those you've trained. You keep a private ledger of the people you've personally helped over the years. The entries are brief but meaningful. William Porter, transported for laudanum theft, now successful merchant in Charleston with wife and 3 children. Margaret Harrison, nearly died from gin consumption, now operates boarding house for women in recovery. Samuel Morrison Jr., son of my employer, overcame opium addiction, now studying medicine at Edinburgh. The ledger contains more than 300 such entries, each representing a life that might have been lost to addiction but was instead reclaimed and redirected toward productive purposes. Chapter 44, The Final Teaching. When experience becomes universal truth. Your last major work, begun in 1735, is a comprehensive guide for families and communities dealing with addiction. Unlike your earlier books, which were primarily addressed to medical professionals, this final volume is written for ordinary people who find themselves confronting addiction in their loved ones. The book, titled When Someone You Love is Lost, a family guide to understanding and responding to habituation, addresses the questions you've been asked hundreds of times over the years. How do you know when someone's use of medicine has become addiction? What should you do when someone you care about refuses to acknowledge their condition? How do you help without enabling? How do you maintain hope without ignoring reality? When is it necessary to separate yourself from someone whose addiction is destroying their life and threatening yours? The book's most important chapter deals with what you call the paradox of love and recovery. You argue that while love and support are essential for recovery, they can also become obstacles if they protect the addicted person from experiencing the consequences of their choices. True love sometimes requires allowing those we care about to experience the full weight of their decisions, you write. The kindness that pays an addict's debts, provides them with housing they have not earned, or makes excuses for their behavior, may actually prevent the suffering that motivates change. This insight comes from years of observing both successful and failed recovery attempts. You've noticed that people who have the most loving, supportive families often have the most difficulty achieving lasting recovery, while those who face their addiction alone are sometimes more motivated to change. The paradox isn't absolute. Love and support remain crucial for recovery. But they must be offered in ways that encourage responsibility rather than dependence, growth rather than stagnation. Your final chapter addresses the question of forgiveness, both forgiving the addicted person and helping them forgive themselves. Forgiveness, you conclude, is not about forgetting the past or pretending that harmful actions didn't occur. It's about choosing to define people by their potential rather than their history, and by their current choices rather than their past mistakes. This choice must be made repeatedly, daily, sometimes hourly. It's not a single decision, but a way of life. Chapter 45, The Full Circle Completed. when endings reveal beginnings. On a cold February morning in 1737, exactly 50 years after you first tasted laudanum for a toothache in London, you receive a visitor who completes the circle of your long journey. She introduces herself as Mary Whitmore, granddaughter of your former employer, Master Whitmore. She's traveled from London to Norfolk specifically to meet you, carrying with her a leather portfolio that contains documents you haven't seen in 5 decades. My grandfather kept your letters, she explains, opening the portfolio to reveal the correspondence you exchanged years earlier. He also kept records of your employment, samples of your work, and she pauses, withdrawing a small, familiar object. This. It's your mother's silver ring, the one you considered selling during your desperate final days in London, but somehow never did. You'd assumed it was lost when your belongings were confiscated after your arrest. Grandfather found it among your possessions when he searched your desk after you left, Mary explains. He kept it all these years, thinking someday he might have opportunity to return it. When he died last year, he left instructions that it should be brought to you if you were still alive. The ring feels strange in your hand after so many years. It's smaller than you remembered, more delicate, yet somehow heavier with the weight of memory and time. Mary continues, Grandfather read your books, you know, all of them. He followed your work from a distance, and he was proud isn't the right word exactly, impressed, humbled perhaps. He said more than once that your transformation was the most remarkable thing he'd witnessed in his lifetime. She pulls out another document, Master Whitmore's will. In it, he leaves a substantial sum to the Norfolk Institute, with instructions that it be used to help people overcome the condition that afflicted Thomas, who transformed his greatest failure into his greatest service. The bequest is more than generous. It's enough to expand the Institute's work significantly. But more important than the money is what it represents. Complete forgiveness and recognition of the value of your life's work from the man you once wronged most deeply. That evening, alone in your study, you examine the ring by candlelight and reflect on the journey it has witnessed. The young man who inherited this ring was confident, ambitious, and ultimately vulnerable to temptations he didn't understand. The old man who holds it now has learned that strength comes not from avoiding failure, but from learning how to rebuild after it. The ring has been transformed by its journey, just as you have. It's still silver, still beautiful, but it now carries the patina of time and the weight of experience. It's more valuable now than when it was new, not despite its trials, but because of them. Epilogue. The continuing story, when endings become beginnings. Thomas died peacefully in his sleep on March 15th, 1742, at the age of 79. His funeral in Norfolk was attended by more than 500 people, including former clients, students, colleagues, and ordinary citizens whose lives had been touched by his work and example. But his real monument isn't the Norfolk Institute, which continued operating until the American Revolution, or his books, which remained influential well into the 19th century. His real monument is the principle he demonstrated through his life, that no failure is final, no fall is irreversible, and no person is beyond redemption if they're willing to do the hard work of rebuilding themselves and dedicating their rebuilt life to serving others. The approach to addiction treatment that Thomas pioneered, combining medical understanding with psychological insight and moral guidance, became the foundation for what we now call recovery medicine. His emphasis on peer support, lifestyle change, and finding meaning beyond substance use anticipated modern therapeutic communities and 12-step programs by more than 200 years. His personal story became a template for what we now recognize as recovery advocacy, the idea that people who have successfully overcome addiction have unique qualifications for helping others do the same. This principle underlies modern peer recovery programs, recovery coaching, and the growing recognition that lived experience is a valuable form of expertise. Perhaps most importantly, Thomas demonstrated that the experience of addiction and recovery, when properly understood and shared, can become a source of wisdom that benefits not just other addicts, but society as a whole. His insights into human motivation, the nature of change, and the conditions that support healing have applications far beyond substance abuse treatment. The ring that connected him to his past became a symbol he often used in his later teachings. Recovery, he would tell his students, isn't about returning to who you were before addiction. It's about becoming who you were meant to be all along, but transformed by experience, strengthened by struggle, and dedicated to helping others find their own path home. Hey guys, that was the terrifying life of a laudanum addict in early modern London. And as you can see, it was both worse and more hopeful than you probably imagined when we started this journey together. If you made it through this entire story, you've just experienced something that most people in 1687 never could have imagined. A complete, honest account of addiction from the inside, told without shame or judgment, but also without romanticizing or excusing the behavior it describes. Thomas's story shows us that addiction has been destroying lives for centuries, but also that recovery has been possible for just as long. The tools and understanding available to him were primitive compared to what we have today, but the fundamental requirements for recovery, honesty, willingness to change, community support, and finding meaning beyond substance use, remain the same. What strikes me most about this story is how modern Thomas's insights were, despite being developed 300 years ago. His understanding that addiction is a medical condition requiring comprehensive treatment, his emphasis on peer support and lifestyle change, his recognition that recovery requires addressing underlying psychological and spiritual needs, these principles still guide the best addiction treatment programs today. But the story also reminds us how much social attitudes matter. Thomas lived in a time when addiction was seen purely as moral failing, when treatment consisted of condemnation and punishment, when recovery was considered impossible. The progress he made was remarkable, partly because he had to overcome not just his addiction, but the social stigma and ignorance surrounding it. We've come a long way since 1687 in our understanding of addiction, but we still have work to do. Too many people still face the same shame and stigma that Thomas experienced. Too many families still don't know how to help their loved ones. Too many communities still respond to addiction with punishment rather than treatment. If Thomas's story teaches us anything, it's that addiction doesn't discriminate. It can affect anyone, regardless of intelligence, character, or social status. But it also teaches us that recovery is always possible, even from the depths of despair, if we're willing to do the work and accept the help that's available. So let me know in the comments. What surprised you most about this story? What parallels do you see with modern addiction and recovery? And if you or someone you love is struggling with substance use, I hope Thomas's journey gives you hope that change is possible and help is available. Thanks for joining me on this journey through one of history's most honest accounts of addiction and recovery. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button and let me know what other historical stories you'd like to explore. Remember, no matter how dark the night, dawn is always possible. Thomas proved that 300 years ago, and people are proving it again every day. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.